Chapter 1. Radon Town was a very ordinary town. There was nothing special about it. At the southern end of the market in the center of the town, a young man in ragged clothes was lying under a dilapidated mud wall in an alley. There were many people coming and going outside the alley, but no one paid much attention to the young man. Perhaps they had been accustomed to it. A black lightning silently flashed across the sky. The young man's body suddenly trembled, and then he uttered a painful groan. But neither the lightning nor the young man's groan attracted anyone's attention. Just then, a girl of 16 or 17 years old turned into the alley. Two middle-aged men were chasing her and shouting, "Miss, wait, miss." The girl strode past the mud wall. Perhaps she was tired of being chased, so she suddenly stopped, turned around, and screamed, "You are so annoying. Don't follow me. Do you really want me to marry that damn dwarf?" Before her voice died away, the girl raised her hand and threw the necklace in her hand. The middle-aged man who was running in front hurriedly reached out his hand to block the attack. The necklace hit his hand first, and then bounced out, drawing a trajectory, and coincidentally fell on the forehead of the beggar. The necklace was broken, and the fiery red beads scrambled to roll down and sprinkled on the ground. Han Jin struggled to open his eyes. Just when he regained consciousness, the first thing he thought about was not the surrounding environment, nor the various strange and incomprehensible things in the turbulence of time and space, but how to relieve his hunger. It was reasonable to say that Han Jin should not be easily defeated by hunger, which was inseparably related to his cultivation method. Han Jin's master was a genius of the generation, who created his own cultivation method. In his master's words, aura was also a kind of resource, just like gasoline. 1,000 years later, there may be no more petroleum on the earth, because we consume it too fast. A long time ago, cultivators were everywhere, and each of them was consuming a lot of aura. Now, aura had been exhausted, and it was impossible to ascend through the normal channels. 1,000 years later, the present car may only lie in the museum as a decoration. In the same way, the previous precious cultivation method may be just useless garbage for modern people. Han Jin's master also said, from the analysis of life form, animals were more advanced than plants. Absorbing aura between heaven and earth by breathing was undoubtedly a plant's way of life. Instead of spending energy on the remaining aura, it was better to completely change the way of thinking. Modern science proved that if the human body could fully digest and absorb food, a piece of bread was enough for a day's consumption. But to replenish life energy through eating, this was an animal's way of replenishing life energy. Since animals' life form was more advanced than plants, this way of replenishing life energy should also be more advanced than plants. In the cultivation system, the energy that people absorbed through food was acquired grain essence. Compared with innate vitality, acquired grain essence was just an impurity, which could not be brought to the table. However, Han Jin's master insisted that although there were many kinds of energy, in the end, they could all be traced back to the same source. Han Jin's master practiced and went further and further on this unprecedented path. Some cultivators could not understand, and secretly ridiculed Han Jin's master for being a rice bucket because his appetite was too big. Legend has it that Han Jin's master ate half a cow in one meal, which was a strange story, but Han Jin's master could eat the rations of hundreds of people for a day in one meal. Ridicule was ridicule, but the only thing that could prove everything was time. Han Jin's master's peers passed away in the erosion of time. Until the last moment, ascension was still a distant dream for them, but Han Jin's master was able to survive. Let's not talk about whether this path was the right one or the wrong one. At least there was hope. Han Jin was a very lucky man. When he had embarked on the road of cultivation, the pioneers had already developed a set of practical methods and steps in practice, as well as the effects of each stage. He could just follow them and use them accordingly. He had to admit that this kind of unusual method was indeed more effective and convenient than the plant method in some aspects. Han Jin came into contact with cultivation at the age of 16, and in just 7 years, his strength surpassed most of his peers including many children of cultivation families, and became the leader of the younger generation. If he did not need to do anything else, Han Jin could eat all day long, and his digestive and absorption ability had reached 99.9%, which meant that he could almost completely absorb all the food he ate. When his body was destroyed, Han Jin suddenly remembered his master's words at the last moment. Death was not the end of life. Relying on his trust in his master, and relying on his persistence, his primordial spirit did not disappear with the death of his body, but struggled to break into an indescribable passage, and finally struggled to come to this world. No matter who the body of the beggar belonged to, and who the soul belonged to, the energy of both had dropped to the lowest point. Han Jin urgently needed to replenish his energy, so his hunger was magnified countless times, to the extent that he could no longer control his emotions. Just as he opened his eyes, Han Jin saw fiery red beads scattered all over the ground. Energy. This was Han Jin's first reaction. Then, with a twitching movement, he grabbed one of the beads, stuffed it into his mouth, and swallowed it immediately. As for what the food was made of, he did not care. After completing the building foundation, he had eaten the Tianshan warm jade, the Hung River fire essence, and even the galactic sand. He could eat any other materials that cultivators regarded as materials for refining magical equipment. As long as they contained energy, he would be able to absorb all of it. Hey, you can't eat that. Seeing this scene, the girl cried out in alarm. In fact, the necklace she was wearing was made from the magic crystal of a long-eared rabbit. Although it was also a fire element magic crystal, the level of the long-eared rabbit was too low, and the fire element contained in the magic crystal was too little. Its ornamental value was far greater than its practical value, so it was used to make a necklace. Han Jin's eyes suddenly bulged outwards. The moment the fiery red beads slid into his esophagus, he felt danger. Han Jin's cultivation technique also had its own limits. If he absorbed the energy of food, then there was no problem, the more the better. However, if he wanted to absorb the energy of rare treasures, then there were strict rules. For example, if the energy stored in his body had reached 1,000, then he could absorb 1% of the energy in a day. If he absorbed more than 10% of the energy, which was 1% of the energy in his body, then there was a possibility that it would cause a certain amount of damage, or even cause him to go berserk. Right now, his body was completely empty, without even the slightest bit of energy. If it was in the past, these fiery red beads would be good things to quickly replenish energy, but now, a single bead was enough to take his life. With the last of his strength, Han Jin dug his left hand deep into his throat and forcefully dug, while his right hand heavily hit his chest and abdomen. With a puff, the fiery red bead was spat out. Han Jin's body slowly leaned forward and finally fell to the ground, motionless. "This person is sick?" the girl whispered as she patted her chest. A middle-aged man stretched out his hand to check Han Jin's breathing, and his face changed greatly. "Miss, quickly leave. This person is dead." "What?" The girl's face also changed, and she hurriedly rushed to Han Jin. "Miss." The middle-aged man grabbed the girl's arm. "It's not worth getting into trouble for this beggar. Let's go." Quickly. He knew very well that the miss had already caused a lot of trouble, and if someone deliberately used this matter to make things difficult for her, the miss would be in trouble. "Let go, let me see. Maybe." The girl struggled with all her might. "Miss, don't mess around." The middle-aged man's head was already covered in cold sweat, and he gave the other middle-aged man a look, and the two of them forcefully pulled the girl away from the crime scene. After an unknown amount of time, a burst of hoarse and mournful crying woke Han Jin up. He opened his eyes again and found himself in a person's embrace. That chest was rapidly rising and falling, and he could clearly feel the vibration caused by the sound. Han Jin struggled for a moment, and the crying stopped abruptly. A face that people couldn't bear to look at appeared in front of him. In fact, that face was quite delicate, with big eyes, a straight nose, and a normal face shape, but it was really too dirty, especially since he had just cried. His face was washed by tears, and his hair was very messy, emitting an unpleasant smell, making Han Jin, who always liked to be clean, shrink back. God of light bless. Young master, you're awake. That person let out a cry of joy, and tears once again rushed out of his eyes. Then he held a piece of bread with both hands and handed it to Han Jin's chest. Young master, I know you're starving. It's all my fault for being so useless. It took me so long to buy something. Please eat. At this moment, countless questions flashed through Han Jin's mind, but all of them added together were not as attractive as that piece of bread. Han Jin practically snatched the bread and stuffed it into his mouth. As he swallowed mouthful after mouthful, Han Jin felt an indescribable fullness. There was happiness, a happiness that made people tremble, a satisfaction that made people want to cry. He really didn't expect that hunger could make him like this. Thinking back to what he heard before, there were a few miners who were trapped underground for 5 to 6 days. After they were rescued, one of them who maintained his physical strength the best actually avoided the doctor's supervision and ate wildly, and in the end, he stuffed himself to death. Now, he could completely understand what kind of tragedy that was. Although he had changed into a different body, Han Jin's cultivation method was still there. The bread he swallowed quickly turned into traces of energy, nourishing his body and spirit that was on the verge of collapse. Han Jin squinted his eyes in satisfaction, and the young man grinned widely. After a moment, Han Jin opened his eyes again. With the replenishment of energy, his mind became much more flexible. Looking at the young man in front of him, he asked tentatively, Stillberg, young master, you called for me? What's wrong? Nothing. Han Jin coughed dryly. The information he received was not an illusion. The young man in front of him was a servant, and also the last property of a fallen noble. Do you still have bread? I know, you're not full. Stillberg jumped up. Please wait, I'll go buy some now. Chapter 2. Not long after Stillberg left, Han Jin suddenly thought of those fiery red beads. He sat up and groped around for a moment before he found a red bead under his butt. The others were gone. Could they be with Stillberg? Han Jin thought for a moment. Using his right hand to support himself against the broken wall, he tentatively stood up little by little. Although he had completely digested and absorbed the energy in the bread, the energy was still too little. If he ate another 7 or 8 pieces of the same bread, the energy he had accumulated was just enough to form a basic unit of energy. In his previous world, the popularization of computers had created a digital world. But 90 years ago, his master had created a digital cultivation method. The most basic unit of energy was 1 yuan. Accumulating 10,000 yuan of energy was 1 jia. Accumulating 10,000 jia of energy was 1 xian. Accumulating 10,000 xian of energy was 1 tai. Accumulating 10,000 tai of energy was 1 tai. Accumulating 10,000 tai of energy would allow one to cultivate an indestructible golden body, just like his master. The most frightening thing about this cultivation method was that there was no bottleneck. As long as there was a sufficient source of energy, except for the beginning of the foundation, no matter if it was the first stage or the last stage, one could progress at the same speed. One could absorb 1,000th of the energy every day. The stronger one's energy was, the more energy one could absorb. Han Jin was originally a good boy who studied hard and made progress every day. He was able to embark on the path of cultivation because this cultivation method was very effective. At that time, Han Jin had only practiced for a few days, but he could clearly feel the energy he had accumulated. From then on, he was full of confidence for the future. What Han Jin didn't know was that his master had chosen him to inherit the mantle. It wasn't without reason. Han Jin's perception was very sharp. In the jargon, this was a special root of wisdom. If it were an ordinary person, they might not be able to feel the subtle changes. Although the energy absorbed was very little, but it was more than enough for him to walk a few steps. Han Jin moved his body a few times and walked in the direction of Stillberg. One was to know more about this completely strange world. The other was to ask about the whereabouts of those red beads. A red bead contained about 20 or 30 yuan of energy. Although he couldn't absorb the energy from it, but after several months, he could accumulate a certain amount of basic energy from ordinary food. Then he would be able to take the red beads. 1,000th was a conservative rule. 100th was the real danger line. At this moment, he couldn't afford to be overcautious. He had to restore his strength as soon as possible. Radon Town was not big. After walking for a short time, he saw the wheat field outside the town, but he still couldn't find Stillberg. Coincidentally, a burst of children's laughter attracted Han Jin's attention. He turned his head and saw a group of children were playing a horse riding game. Children riding a horse was dangerous, but the game they played was special because they were riding a human. His only servant, Stillberg, was crawling on the ground. There was a 13 or 14-year-old boy riding on his back. Several children were running in front of Stillberg, as if they were luring Stillberg with something. The boy was very fat, at least 150 kilograms. But Stillberg was thin. Every step he crawled seemed to be very difficult. The boy on his back was somewhat dissatisfied, constantly whipping Stillberg's ass with a branch. When the children ran in a different direction, Han Jin saw clearly that the thing they used to lure Stillberg was a piece of bread. At this moment, a memory came into Han Jin's mind. The name of this body was Raphael. Raphael's parents died too early. When he had to run the family business, he was only 15 years old. The naive boy didn't understand the difficulty of running a family business. His nature was lazy, so it only took him 3 years to lose the family business. Since he was young, Stillberg had always been with him. Yes, Stillberg had many shortcomings. It could even be said that Stillberg had made great contributions to the family business. But one thing was indisputable, and that was Stillberg's loyalty to him. Even though he was already a beggar, Raphael still didn't want to do anything. The burden of life was all on Stillberg. But Raphael himself was useless. So how could Stillberg have the ability to make a living? It should be known that the two of them grew up together. Other than selling his self-esteem to beg or to entertain others, Stillberg had no other choice. In the past, Raphael didn't know what Stillberg had done outside. As long as he could eat every day, he would be satisfied. As for how much Stillberg had endured outside, he didn't have the heart to ask. But at this moment, Han Jin understood Stillberg's grievances, just like in front of him. In the field, Stillberg was so tired that he couldn't crawl anymore. He stopped there and gasped for breath. A child approached Stillberg with a piece of bread and deliberately teased him a few times. Unexpectedly, Stillberg suddenly pounced forward and snatched the bread away. This matched the memory Han Jin received. Stillberg wasn't stupid. He was still a little smart. The children roared with laughter. The youth on Stillberg's back jumped down and cursed something. He raised his leg and kicked Stillberg's waist. Stillberg was kicked to the sky. His hands were curled up in front of his chest like a puppy. He revealed a flattering smile. Obviously, not only was he used to all of this, he also knew how to protect himself and how to please others. The laughter became louder. Han Jin lowered his head. After a moment, he raised his head at an extremely slow speed. At this moment, Raphael's temperament had undergone an earth-shattering change. Although his clothes were still so tattered and his body was still so weak, he exuded an indescribable sharpness, like an unsheathed sword. Scram! The youth waved his hand. Stillberg got up and ran in the direction of the market. Just as he ran a few steps, he saw Han Jin and couldn't help but be stunned. Han Jin didn't say anything. He turned around and walked back. Stillberg hurriedly followed. He also understood that the scene, just now, was very ugly. It could be said that he had lost all of Raphael's face. Although in the eyes of outsiders, the abject young Master Raphael didn't have much face, Stillberg had been educated like a servant since young. No matter when or where, he would always treat young Master Raphael as his only master. Young Master. After a long time, Stillberg couldn't help but call out tentatively. Han Jin turned around and looked at Stillberg. He sighed lightly, then reached out his hand and patted the dust on Stillberg's body. In fact, he didn't know what to say. After all, the person who was insulted wasn't him. He could only use actions to express his goodwill. "Young master, you..." Stillberg timidly moved back. Han Jin's action was too intimate for him. Whether it was in the past, when he was living a life of luxury, or now, when he was in poverty, he had never forgotten his own identity. He also guarded his own identity. "Look at your dirty face." Han Jin smiled. "Is there any water nearby?" "River water is also fine. When I see you, I see myself. I reckon that we are all dirty." "River?" Stillberg was a little surprised. He looked seriously at Han Jin. "Young master, that Shui River belongs to Lord Manhanna. Did you forget? The last time we went to take a bath, what happened last time doesn't mean that it will be the same this time. If it really doesn't work, we can run a little further away." Han Jin said softly. "Oh," Stillberg responded. The two slowly walked back to the market and walked back to the broken wall. Han Jin sat down in his original position. Stillberg sat on the side with a smile. The atmosphere fell into silence again. Han Jin had just received the original owner's memory, so he decided to speak less to avoid exposing himself. Stillberg found that the young master was a little strange today. He didn't dare to speak carelessly for fear of angering the young master. After a while, Stillberg couldn't help but say to himself, "Those little bastards are getting more and more outrageous." "What?" Han Jin was worried about not being able to find a topic, so he naturally asked back. "In the past, as long as I called them young master a few times, they wouldn't make things difficult for me. But, damn it, let's wait and see," Stillberg said with a face full of hatred. "Don't go looking for them anymore." Han Jin said slowly. Human nature contained a deep-rooted bad habit that was difficult to change. Stillberg didn't understand, but Han Jin was very clear about it. After all, a fallen noble was still a noble. Stillberg was a servant of a noble. Humiliating him, playing with him, and hearing him respectfully call him young master a few times would undoubtedly bring a sense of glory. Later on, their methods became more and more outrageous. It was also understandable that people would always seek new stimuli. Give an inch and you want a mile. Stillberg's resignation made them more and more daring. Then how do we? Leave it to me." Although Stillberg didn't finish his words, Han Jin understood what he meant. If no one went out to beg, they would starve to death. Stillberg looked at Han Jin with an uncertain gaze. He found that the young master in front of him had become very unfamiliar. "By the way, have you eaten today?" Han Jin asked. Their living conditions were very bad. They couldn't even talk about 3 meals a day. It was already good enough that they had food. Stillberg suddenly remembered something. He handed the bread in his hand to Han Jin, but halfway through, he froze. He must have remembered the origin of the bread. He didn't want to hand it over, but he also didn't want to take it back. He was in a dilemma. Han Jin took the bread, took a bite, and asked again, "Have you eaten today?" His original intention was to give this bread to Stillberg, but looking at the other's expression, if he refused, he would definitely hurt Stillberg's heart. He could only take it first. Stillberg revealed a bright smile and nodded vigorously. "Young master, I've eaten. I ate a lot." After saying that, he deliberately burped. Han Jin smiled. A long time ago, he understood how important details were and how important it was to pay attention to details. Touching others, deceiving others, discovering others, and exposing others all had to start from the details. In other words, the details determined success or failure. And in this aspect, he had very strong insight. He could easily see what Stillberg was hiding. Han Jin broke the bread in half and handed the bigger half back. "Eat some more. You're still growing." Stillberg was stunned again. "Eat when I tell you to," Han Jin said seriously. Stillberg took the bread with trembling hands. He carefully turned to the side and swallowed small mouthfuls. At the same time, 2 drops of tears quietly slid down his cheeks. "Why are you crying?" Han Jin frowned slightly. "Young master, you're too good to me." Stillberg choked. Although his body was very weak now, Han Jin was definitely not an ordinary person. Under his previous wanton behavior, there was unfathomable shrewdness and scheming. But after hearing Stillberg's words, Han Jin was dumbfounded. He even almost thought that Stillberg was being sarcastic. Who was being good to whom? After a while, Han Jin recovered. Seeing that Stillberg had finished the bread, he took out the fiery red bead. Stillberg, when you first came back, did you see this red bead? No, I just saw you lying unconscious on the ground. I was scared out of my wits. I thought you... Are you sure? I really didn't. Stillberg suddenly realized. I was wondering why young master didn't let me go find them. You wanted to sell this magic crystal for bread, right? Magic crystal? How much can it be sold for? It can't be sold for much. This is the magic crystal of the lowest level magic beast, the long-eared rabbit. It's useless to Mr. Mage. Because this kind of magic crystal has a beautiful color and a full shape, it contains very little fire element. There won't be any accidents. So many girls like to use it to make jewelry. The lowest level magic beast? Very little fire element? Han Jin found a lot of meaningful things from Stillberg's words. If it's a very powerful magic beast, its magic crystal will contain a lot of fire element. Young master, what's wrong with you? There are many types of magic beasts. How can all the magic crystals be the same? There are fire element magic crystals, water element magic crystals, and... Young master, you don't even know this? Stillberg looked Han Jin up and down, as if he had never seen Han Jin before. When I fainted just now, my head seemed to have been hit. I was a little confused. I almost didn't recognize you. Han Jin smiled bitterly. He also knew that he shouldn't say too much, but the information revealed by Stillberg was too important. He had to ask clearly. Young master, are you okay? Stillberg asked nervously. Maybe I'll be fine after a sleep. Han Jin shook his head. Go on. Stillberg began to talk. His knowledge was limited, so what he said was also limited. However, Han Jin's ability to understand was amazing. With Stillberg's explanation, this strange world became clearer and clearer. Then, what magic beast's magic crystal contains the most elements? Of course, it's the magic crystal of a dragon. Stillberg laughed. Young master, don't think too much. Even if we sell the whole town, we still can't afford a dragon's magic crystal. Han Jin's hands were trembling slightly. Even a magic crystal of the lowest level magic beast, the long-eared rabbit, had dozens of yuan of energy to absorb. Then how much energy would a magic crystal of a high-level magic beast contain? What about a dragon's magic crystal? As for Stillberg's words about how scary a dragon was, Han Jin didn't care at all. When he was preparing to hunt a dragon's magic crystal, his basic energy should be hundreds or even thousands of times that of a dragon. This way, he could safely absorb energy. And energy was also a guarantee of strength. More than hundreds of times, what was there to worry about? Of course, all of this required a premise, the original accumulation of energy. He couldn't even absorb the magic crystal of a long-eared rabbit, let alone a magic beast. Go, sell this magic crystal, and then buy some bread back. Han Jin put the magic crystal in Stillberg's hand. He needed food now. The more food, the better. Chapter 3. The sky was getting dark, but Stillberg had not come back. Han Jin felt that he should not waste any more time, so he closed his eyes and began to meditate. But just as he began to meditate, a burst of noises came from afar and rushed towards his direction. Han Jin had to open his eyes. There were about a dozen men in front of him, and each of them was wearing a long sword at their waist. Their leather armor was very rough. It looked like they had dug a hole in it and put it over their head. Inferring from this, the long sword at their waist should be the same kind of goods. But these people were obviously a group, and they were carrying weapons. Law enforcement team? Underworld? Han Jin slowly stood up by holding the broken wall. He knew that the target was himself. The leader was a middle-aged man in his 40s, with a dark face and a strong body. Behind him, two men were dragging a man covered with blood stains. As if feeling Han Jin's gaze, the dragged man groaned and struggled to raise his head. Han Jin's eyelids suddenly twitched. Stillberg. In a received memory, Stillberg's character was very dirty. Of course, Raphael was not much better. The reason why the mayor of Radon Town, Manhanna, was against them was that Stillberg climbed the wall in the middle of the night to peep at the little girl. As a result, he was caught red-handed and was almost beaten to death. Did Stillberg get into trouble again? Hanjin could not help but frown. Ah, young Master Raphael, long time no see, the middle-aged man shouted. Although the middle-aged man's tone was very normal, and his expression was also very decent, but Hanjin could clearly feel a strong contempt. What's going on? Hanjin asked. You can't blame me, young Master Raphael. This trash dared to steal. The middle-aged man grabbed Stillberg's hair and dragged Stillberg very rudely. Haha, I don't know what this guy was thinking. Stealing is not a big deal, but he even took out the stolen magic crystal to sell. And then, oh, young Master Raphael, this guy said that you gave him the magic crystal? Tell me, is it true or not? The middle-aged man deliberately approached Hanjin, with his eyes wide open, with an aggressive look, as if he wanted to catch Hanjin and interrogate him. Hanjin was silent. He was not afraid of trouble, but the received memory was too complicated. He needed to sort it out before making a decision. I see. That middle-aged man saw that he had firmly suppressed Hanjin in terms of aura, and said with a fake smile, This guy must be randomly biting people. How can such a righteous person like young Master Raphael be in cahoots with a thief? You guys bring him back and interrogate him properly. A few burly men grabbed Stillberg, but Stillberg did not cry, nor did he scream. He just stared at Hanjin with a look of despair. I gave him the magic crystal, which dog eye of yours saw us stealing. Hanjin said coldly. Once Hanjin said that, the place became silent immediately. Whether it was those burly men with weapons or the crowd of onlookers, all of them were dumbfounded. Even that middle-aged man was stunned, and shouted in a tone of disbelief. What did you say? I asked you which dog eye of yours saw us stealing. You are courting death. That middle-aged man flew into a rage, pulled out his long sword and roared. I called you young master several times. Do you really think you are a young master? Believe it or not, I will kill you right here. Oh, Hanjin replied indifferently. That middle-aged man became angrier. He took a step forward, raised the long sword over his head, and was about to cut down. Hanjin's face was full of calmness. At this moment, he still had the leisure to evaluate the flaws in the opponent's starting posture. Screams came from the crowd of onlookers. Radon Town was located in a remote area. Relatively speaking, the people here lived a very peaceful life and rarely saw such a scene. That inferior long sword was suspended in the air, less than half a foot away from Hanjin's head, but it could no longer fall. Hanjin smiled. Every world had its own rules. Raphael was a baron, a member of the privileged class. Although he had no money and power now, and lived like a beggar, but his status had not changed. Even if he killed a civilian in public, he would be punished, not to mention killing a noble. What's more, there was no irreconcilable hatred between them. Raphael's memory told him that this middle-aged man was the town's magistrate, named Sifani. It was because Mayor Manhanna hated Raphael and his servant very much, so he worked hard to make trouble for them. He would never want to die together with Raphael. Well, you dare to be unreasonable after stealing from others? A white-haired old man jumped out from the crowd of burly men. Whose thing did I steal? Hanjin asked back. Mine. The old man spread out his hand, and there was a fiery red bead in his palm. Hanjin turned his eyes to Stillberg. Stillberg struggled and shouted, Young master, this old bastard did it on purpose. I'll go to him. Just as he shouted, a burly man beside him slapped Stillberg's face, and the following words were abruptly swallowed back. Hanjin saw this and hated it in his heart, but he could do nothing, so he coldly said to the old man, How do you know that Stillberg stole from you? He came to me with the magic crystal to sell, and I saw it at a glance. The old man sarcastically said, Young Master Raphael, you said that you gave the magic crystal to Stillberg in your present situation. Hey, can you really take out the magic crystal? Stillberg stole from you, and then went back to sell it to you? Is there such a stupid person? Hanjin shook his head. It doesn't matter if you are a pig. Your mistake is that you shouldn't treat others as pigs. The old man was very surprised. Everyone in the town knew that Raphael had been poor for a few years. At first, everyone had some scruples because of his identity, but as time went by, they didn't treat Raphael as a noble, and finally, they didn't even treat him as a human. Why was Raphael so bold today? Although they didn't understand, they still had to find a way to save their face. The old man shouted to Sephanti, "Lord Sephanti, this kid is stubborn. Capture him and torture him. I don't believe that he won't be honest." "Good idea." Han Jean sneered. "Let me suffer first, and when the court intervenes, it will be other people's turn to suffer. But no matter who suffers, no one will find fault with you, right?" The court that Han Jean mentioned was a place that specialized in adjudicating the crimes of nobles. Even if he really stole something, the people in the town had no right to convict him, not even the mayor. They had to go to the court in the city. And torturing a noble without permission was much more serious than stealing. The old man's eyes widened, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. In his impression, Raphael was a hopeless idiot who knew that today's Raphael had changed into another person. Not only was he reasonable, but he also knew how to sow discord. "Don't go too far," a muffled voice outside the crowd said. "Just because a magic crystal, you beat him up like this, and now you want to arrest him." Who? Who was talking nonsense just now? Sephanti, who was worried about not being able to get off the stage, shouted. His eyes turned to the crowd. "Stand up for me." The crowd rushed out, not voluntarily, but forcibly pushed by someone. A man who was as strong as a mountain slowly walked in. He was taller than everyone present, and on his shoulder was a frightening giant sword. What was more surprising was that the giant sword didn't have a scabbard, and was just casually tied with a few circles of straw rope. Most of the blade was exposed, and there were still black traces on the blade. Only God knew if that was human blood or not. Although he walked very slowly, his aura was suffocating. Sephanti suddenly shut his mouth because he didn't dare to shout anymore. You were a mercenary?" The old man smiled. "Nonsense, didn't you see the badge?" The big man said angrily. May I ask, which mercenary group are you from? Do you want to make friends with me? Or do you want to take revenge on me in the future?" The burly man suddenly grabbed the old man's hand. The old man cried out in pain as the magic crystal in his hand rolled to the ground. Then the burly man threw the magic crystal forcefully. The old man staggered back 7 or 8 steps and fell to the ground with a plop. The burly man bent down and picked up the magic crystal. Wasn't this daylight robbery? However, the surrounding people were silent, including Sephanti, who was in charge of security, who kept quiet out of fear. Mercenaries, warriors who could be hired, lived on the edge of life and death all year round, and most people in this line of work were not to be trifled with. Mercenaries were limited. If they couldn't survive in one place, they could just change places, but ordinary people couldn't. "What are you looking at?" The big man said coldly. "This magic crystal is not mine, nor is it yours." After that, the big man inserted the giant sword into the ground, and his right hand reached for his waist. There were more than 10 red beads in his palm, which were exactly the same as the magic crystal in his left hand. "Understand? These magic crystals belong to my employer," the big man said in a sarcastic tone. "As for these 2 people, I promise they didn't steal. Now, do you have any questions? If not, you can get lost." When Sheriff Sephanti heard that the other party had been hired by the people of the town, his courage was boosted. He wanted to say something official, but who knew that the other party's tone was getting more and more arrogant and disrespectful. Sheriff Sephanti's expression kept changing, and in the end, his cowardly side prevailed. He waved his hand and left with his people in disgrace. A group of ignorant country bumpkins. The big man spat and strode out of the field. He acted bravely just because of sympathy and because he knew the origin of the magic crystal under certain conditions. In fact, in his eyes, the master and servant who were like beggars were worse than those country bumpkins. He was not in a mood to talk to Han Jean at all. Chapter 4. Soaking in the cool river water, Han Jean had a very comfortable feeling. Although the flowing river water would take away some of the heat, and cause unnecessary loss. His body was too dirty. Moreover, today was the day he was reborn. Washing away the old dirt was symbolic. Still, Bird didn't come down. He sat by the river and stared at the flowing river water, lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" Han Jin asked curiously. After going through these things, he already regarded Stillberg as his friend. "Young master, the mercenaries are too impressive." Stillberg's eyes were full of admiration. That guy Sifanti usually bullies people everywhere, but in front of them, he doesn't even dare to fart. Tiskaith, after a moment, Stillberg added, "Young master, when can we be as impressive as him? In the future, we won't be bullied by anyone." Han Jin said slowly. "Oh," Stillberg replied, but his tone was very reluctant. Obviously, he didn't believe Han Jin's promise. He couldn't be blamed. The current Han Jin was a fallen noble who couldn't even solve the problem of food and clothing. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't believe Han Jin's words. "You also come down and wash up." Han Jin smiled and changed the topic. "Okay." Stillberg stood up and took off his clothes. He went around to Han Jin's downstream and jumped into the river with a strange cry. However, he quickly struggled to climb ashore. "What's wrong?" Han Jin asked. "Pain," Stillberg said with a grimace. In the evening, he was beaten up and there were many bruises on his body. When the river water hit him, the pain was unbearable. "Bear with it," Han Jin said softly. "You must wash up. We can't be like before." "Young master, I know." Stillberg said that he knew, but in fact, he was a little confused. What did bathing have to do with not being able to laze around like before? Han Jin had been soaking in the river for several hours. Stillberg, who had entered the water after him, had already finished bathing. When he came ashore, Stillberg was squatting by the bonfire, concentrating on something. "What is that?" Han Jin smelled a faint fragrance, and his spirit was immediately lifted. "It's cassava, young master." Stillberg smiled and said, "Didn't you ask me to go to the town to get some clothes?" "On my way back, I dug up a few pieces of cassava in Old Tom's field." Han Jin picked up the clothes that Stillberg fetched, shook them, and put them on. Looking at the roasted cassava, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Food was energy, and he needed energy too much. First of all, he had to transform and forge his body. The digestive and absorption capacity of this body was too low, and the energy utilization rate was less than 20%. Secondly, he had to prepare for the absorption of magic crystals in the future, and all these required energy as support. "Young master, this is cooked." Stillberg picked up a piece of cassava with a wooden stick and sent it to Han Jin. Han Jin didn't hesitate. He quickly peeled off the outer layer of charred skin and ate it in a few bites. Then he ate the rest of the cassava by himself. Stillberg smiled happily. To put it nicely, this was affection. To put it bluntly, this was servility. He was happier to see Han Jin eat than to eat by himself. "Is there more?" Han Jin asked softly. "Young master, are you not full?" Stillberg hesitated for a moment and said, "Shall I go and dig some more?" "Well, go ahead. It's best if you can dig more." Han Jin nodded. A few pieces of cassava didn't contain much energy, and the digestive and absorption capacity of the body was very poor. Now, the energy accumulated was just a little more than 1 yuan, which was not enough to do anything. "Okay." Stillberg jumped up and ran towards the upstream of the river. The cassava field that Stillberg mentioned should not be far from here. About half an hour later, Stillberg ran back excitedly. He threw the ragged clothes in his hands to the ground. There were more than 20 pieces of cassava wrapped in the clothes. Han Jin poured all the cassava into the bonfire and used a branch to stir them for a while. He didn't care whether the cassava was cooked or not. He picked one out by feeling, peeled off the cassava skin, and blew on it while eating. Stillberg's smile gradually became stiff. He had never seen the young master eat like this. A piece of cassava was eaten in 2 or 3 bites, and then the next one. In the blink of an eye, there were only 3 pieces of cassavas left out of the 20 that he brought back. "You go and dig some more." Han Jin breathed a long sigh. "Well, don't worry. You eat these cassava and then rest for a while." "Young master, you haven't eaten enough?" Stillberg exclaimed. "Just do as I say. Don't ask so much." "Oh." Stillberg smiled bitterly. "But, young master, old Tom usually knows that we are pitiful, so he won't say anything when we dig some cassava. But if I go again, we will make old Tom angry." "Why do you target him? Is he the only one who grows cassava in the whole town? Go to other people's fields?" Stillberg widened his eyes. People always bullied the weak and feared the strong. In the past, when Stillberg couldn't stand the hunger, he would go to the fields outside the town to look for food. Farmer would always beat him if he was caught. Only Old Tom never beat him. Over time, Stillberg formed a habit of picking on Old Tom. "What's wrong?" Hanjin didn't understand what was so surprising about it. "Okay." Stillberg gritted his teeth and stood up. In the past, he was young and couldn't run fast, so he was always caught. But now he should be fine. "You eat the cassava first, and then rest for a while before you go," Hanjin said softly. When Stillberg came back again with a whole bag of cassava, he was exhausted. He put the cassava down and fell asleep. He didn't open his eyes until the first light of dawn. He remembered that he was too tired last night and forgot to say good night to the young master. He looked around for Hanjin's figure. When he saw the surroundings, he was stunned. The cassava that he brought back last night was gone. Only a large pile of cassava skin was left. Hanjin was soaking in the river with his eyes closed, as if he was unconscious. "Young master!" Stillberg suddenly jumped up and rushed to Hanjin. Hearing Stillberg's cry, Hanjin slowly opened his eyes. There was a strange light flashing in his eyes. He absorbed some energy last night and used it all to transform his body. The foundation of this body was too poor. Comparing before and after the transformation, it could be described as earth-shaking. Raphael's face was originally pale, but now it had turned pink, giving people a feeling of extreme purity. Raphael and Stillberg both had black hair, but now Stillberg's hair was like a pile of weeds, while Hanjin's hair was as smooth as silk, black and shiny. The originally craggy ribs on his chest had become faintly discernible, and his whole body had expanded like a balloon. At least, he was much more robust than the current Stillberg. The biggest change was his temperament. The previous timidity, cowardice, self-abandonment, and so on had all disappeared. Hanjin's mouth, eyebrows, cheeks, and even his every movement appeared so mature and natural, with a kind of carefree and unrestrained cynicism. Seeing that Hanjin was fine, Stillberg was relieved, but the next moment his eyes widened again. How did the young master become so good-looking? Hanjin took out a medium-sized cobblestone from the river and weighed it in his palm. Suddenly, he swung his hand, and the cobblestone shot out, making a series of ear-piercing whistling sounds. It hit a sycamore tree on the other side of the river and finally turned into countless gravel shooting out. The sycamore tree trembled violently, and its leaves fell like raindrops. On the trunk that was hit by the cobblestone, there was already a shallow bowl-sized hole. Not bad. Hanjin nodded in satisfaction. Compared to hand-to-hand combat, throwing could save a lot of energy because throwing only needed an instant release. Although there was not much energy left now, it was enough for him to throw out a dozen cobblestones with the same power. "Stillberg, didn't you say that there were low-level magical beasts in the forest over there? Let's go. Take me for a walk." Hanjin said slowly. "Heavens! Young master, who did you learn this from?" Stillberg cried out in surprise and joy. "Is it strange?" Hanjin smiled. "There will be many things that will make you feel strange in the future." Chapter 5. The tallest and longest mountain range on the continent was the Teresham mountain range. It stretched for thousands of miles from east to west. The mountains on the other side of the Jade River were the remnants of the Teresham mountain range. Since it was a remnant of the mountain range, it could be imagined that the mountains here were not very high and the forest was not very lush. There were only low-level magical beasts wandering in the forest, and they were very rare. According to Stillberg, if one went over the mountain, there would be more and more magical beasts inside. But Stillberg immediately regretted it after the introduction. Facing the energetic Han Jin, he begged not to take the risk. He also repeatedly said that only experienced mercenaries and powerful professionals could walk out alive. Han Jin was very curious. Where did Stillberg learn these things? But when he asked, he was speechless. He heard all this from a young bard. At that time, the so-called young Master Raphael was also present. In Stillberg's question, Han Jin secretly reminded himself and gave a few vague answers. Fortunately, Stillberg adhered to the principle of master and servant and did not ask any more questions. In fact, if Stillberg had enough experience, he would have suspected Han Jin a long time ago, because young Master Raphael had undergone huge changes in all aspects. For example, young Master Raphael knew how to care for people. He often asked if he had eaten enough, if he had slept well, and when it was late at night, he would cover him with withered grass and even take off his clothes to cover him. In the past, Stillberg was responsible for the safety of the master and servant, so he was very alert when he slept. The slightest movement would wake him up from his dreams. Feeling the young master's care for him, Stillberg's eyes would always become moist. Not only did he not suspect these abnormal changes, he was grateful to the point that he shed tears. He believed that everything he did for the young master, everything he persevered for, was worth it. Also, after the young master fell, he was very particular. Even if he was about to starve to death, he would not eat anything that looked unclean. Now, the young master had become completely different. He would eat anything and dare to eat anything. Even those ugly and scary hamsters and black snakes were not spared. Moreover, the way the young master ate was very pleasing to the eye. He ate slowly, with a focused and serious expression. His eyes were clear and deep, as if he was tasting the best food in the world. Stillberg remembered that even when the old master was alive, his demeanor could not be compared to the young master now. Of course, Han Jin did not know what Stillberg was thinking. Moreover, Stillberg was not by his side. To the town, Han Jin could endure the taste of food, but he could not endure the life of eating raw meat and drinking blood. The fire seed had been used up, so he could only let Stillberg get some more. At that time, his master had warned him that although he could absorb energy from flesh and blood, that kind of energy was different from the energy naturally produced by eating food. It was very difficult to transform it into innate yuan qi. Moreover, it was very similar to the cultivation method of the devil path. If he developed it to the extreme, he might start to become addicted to devouring people's primordial spirit and nascent soul. Han Jin casually picked up a burning branch, then tore off a hind leg from a roasted hamster and put it into his mouth to carefully chew. Just like what Stillberg saw, Han Jin ate very seriously and completely. Completely meant that he would even chew and swallow the bones, because that was also energy. With each swallow, a trace of energy converged into Han Jin's dantian. He had lived in this forest for 7 days, and finally accumulated more than 100 yuan of energy. He also recovered a little bit of self-confidence. In addition to transforming his body, Han Jin did not dare to waste anything. For example, releasing some energy could prevent mosquitoes from biting him, but he chose to endure it. There was no other way. In the primitive stage of accumulating energy, he had to be harsh and even cruel to himself. Now, there were 2 problems that gave him a headache. One was the problem of magic crystals. He wanted to accumulate a certain amount of energy, then rely on hunting magical beasts and swallowing magic crystals to quickly enhance his strength, but now he found that there was a big gap between the cost and the price. To give a simple example, the magic crystal of a long-eared rabbit only contained 12 yuan of energy. If he sold it, he could buy hundreds of loaves of bread, and hundreds of loaves of bread provided far more energy than a magic crystal. There was another problem. After a few days of transformation, his digestive and absorption capacity had now reached 70%. If he continued to transform, the energy consumption would be much more than before. If he stopped the transformation, the 70% utilization rate would cause unnecessary waste, and the aftermath would be extremely troublesome. After all, he was desperately eating all day long. Only by increasing his digestive and absorption capacity to more than 95% could he say goodbye to that embarrassment. Moreover, Han Jin faintly felt that he was confused somewhere. In other words, he neglected a key point, but he could not tell what it was. There was a rustling sound in the forest, and Stillberg came out with a bag. Back so soon? Han Jin raised his head. Did you get the fire? Got it. Stillberg replied as he put the bag on the ground. Did the old guy say anything bad? Han Jin smiled. The old man he was talking about was the old housekeeper of the family. His name was Barbado. Ever since Raphael sold the last piece of land and the last house, Barbado had announced that he had cut ties with Raphael. Later, he bought a house of his own and married a 25-year-old widow at the age of 60. He was living a happy life. As for where his money came from, no one could say for sure. Although he announced that he had broken off relations, Barbado could not change his own history, nor did he want to be criticized behind his back. Raphael and Stillberg wanted to eat and stay at his place for free, which was certainly impossible. He could only occasionally help Raphael, such as giving him 2 old clothes that no one wore and a few copper coins, of course, only occasionally. No, the old guy seems to be in a hurry to go out. Stillberg glanced at Han Jin with a heavy heart and whispered, Young master, I want to tell you something. Don't worry. What's the matter? Miss Chili should be in big trouble. Han Jin just wanted to ask who Chili was, but suddenly remembered the lesson of these days, and hurriedly changed his words and asked, What trouble? Young master, do you remember the dwarf forging master hired by Miss Chili? Stillberg said angrily. He actually proposed to Miss Chili. Damn it, who does he think he is? Han Jin carefully thought about it. Although the memory he received was very chaotic and incomplete, and there was certainly no Chili, but to make Stillberg so angry, it should have a deep relationship with him. He tentatively asked, and then, did Miss Chili say yes? But that guy opened a forging shop just opposite Miss Chili's shop. Young master, don't you think it's a trap? Han Jin waited for a moment, but really couldn't remember who Miss Chili was. He had to say with a bitter smile, Stillberg, tell me about Miss Chili. Young master, you even forgot about Miss Chili? Stillberg asked in surprise. I remember some, but not very clearly. Han Jin's words were full of contradictions. Young master, didn't you often tell me that if you could marry Miss Chili, you'd rather live 30 years less? How could you forget her? Stillberg shook his head and said, Miss Keeley. She's a big shot. I heard that she's also very famous in the Holy Crown City. Holy Crown City? It's the territory of Lord Dismark, and also our main city. Oh, I remember. Han Jin pretended to be suddenly enlightened. But since Miss Chi Li is a celebrity in the Holy Crown City, why did she come to our Radon town? Well, I don't know. Stillberg scratched his head. What does Miss Chi Li do? Han Jin asked again. She does business. Then she must be very rich. Han Jin thought for a moment. Can't she hire another forging master? She's so rich. Why would she be afraid of a dwarf? And how much money can she make by opening a shop in Radon town? Does she need to fight for it? Young master, you got me in trouble again. Stillberg scratched his head again and smiled bitterly. Forget it. Let's not talk about her. Han Jin's eyes fell on the bag brought back by Stillberg. What's this? He had already understood that Miss Chi Li was just the object of Raphael's fantasy, and he had nothing to do with her. It's cassava, young master. I dug it on the way. Stillberg showed a strange look again. In his view, his young master was dead set on Miss Chi Li, and when he heard this, he should have jumped up and fought with the dwarf. But his reaction was completely beyond his imagination. Just in time, it's time to change my taste. Han Jin showed a happy face. A piece of cassava was more attractive than 10 Miss Chi Li. Anyway, if he had to choose, he would definitely choose the latter. Han Jin turned the bag upside down. Dozens of cassavas rolled on the ground. He suddenly remembered a similar picture. When he just opened his eyes in this world, he saw the string of red beads. The next moment, Han Jin suddenly jumped up and shouted, You're really an idiot. Stillberg was scared. He looked at Han Jin and didn't dare to say anything. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about myself. Han Jin sighed deeply. He found that his original idea was too naive. How many magic crystals could he get by hunting magic beasts by himself? Since magical crystals had a price, and since there was an equivalent exchange in this world, wouldn't it be much easier to change to another path? In a word, he just needed to make money, and then use the money to buy magic crystals. So, the problem that he was worried about was no longer a problem. Energy? As long as he had enough money. He didn't need to care about energy, and the price-performance ratio was negligible. Chapter 6. At the beginning of the night, Han Jin and Stillberg had already returned to the town. Both of them had dressed up delicately. The robes they were wearing were stolen by Stillberg. Not to mention how good the material of the robes was, at least there were no patches on them. Their faces were clean, and their lips were red and their teeth were white. They looked very attractive. However, Stillberg was obviously not confident enough. His eyes kept looking around, while Han Jin was much calmer. His steps were graceful and free, and the corners of his mouth were slightly upturned. His eyes always revealed a faint smile. His whole body was full of extraordinary temperament, giving people a feeling of bathing in the spring breeze. The pedestrians in the town saw Han Jin and also noticed the master and the servant. Some of them, who had some impression of Raphael, suddenly recognized Han Jin. They were all surprised and whispered behind their backs. In fact, Raphael's foundation was very good. 20 years ago, his parents were well-known handsome men and beautiful women. Naturally, his genes were not bad. The only pity was that the real Raphael didn't have any temperament, let alone the charm he had now. Han Jin's fusion made up for the deficiency of Raphael. If Han Jin dressed up and put on expensive clothes, even if he went to the Holy Crown City, he would still be a dazzling young man. Stillberg, which way should we go? Han Jin asked softly. This way. Stillberg pointed with his finger and suddenly said hesitantly, Young master, you have been smiling all the time since we returned to the town. Aren't you tired? Idiot, what do you know? Han Jin stretched out his hand and knocked on Stillberg's head. Smiling is the best weapon. Smiling to your enemy will reduce his vigilance. Smiling to your friend will strengthen the friendship between them. Smiling to a woman will shorten the distance between them. Even forget it, you don't understand it. You're still too young. Stillberg wanted to say that he was a few months older than him, but he didn't dare to say it. He had to change the topic. Young master, do I have to smile too? After saying that, Stillberg imitated Han Jin's smile, but his smile was more flattering. Forget it. Han Jin shook his head helplessly. It was hard to change a person's temperament in a short time. Stillberg used to be Raphael's servant and later became a beggar. His behavior was always a bit wretched. It was better for him to keep a straight face than a smile. While talking, they had arrived at the destination. The small building in front of them was made of stone. There was no sign in front of the building. Only some armors and swords were hanging. Obviously, this was a weapons store. According to Stillberg, the first floor was the store, and the second floor was where Miss Chili lived. The architectural style of the small building was very grand, which was very eye-catching in the small town of Radon. But Han Jin was more confused. Why did Miss Chili, who was also very famous in the Holy Crown City, come to this place? In other words, what could she get here? When Han Jin was about to go inside, a middle-aged man came out to greet him. He looked at Han Jin and said politely, Young master, I'm sorry, we are closed. If you want to buy weapons, please come back in a few days. You misunderstood me. I have something to discuss with Miss Chili. Han Jin smiled. You are? The middle-aged man hesitated and asked. As Han Jin said, his smile played a certain role. In fact, Miss Chili was in a bad mood. Normally, the middle-aged man should directly refuse Han Jin. With Miss Chili's family background, she shouldn't be afraid of offending anyone in Radon Town. But Han Jin's smile was sunny and full of kindness, and his temperament was outstanding. As the saying goes, angry punches don't hit a smiling person, which made the middle-aged man ask subconsciously, My name is Raphael, a hereditary baron. Hanjin said in a low voice. Could you please inform your master? Hanjin didn't mean to oppress the middle-aged man with his status. Strictly speaking, it was a psychological hint. I'm a noble, and I'm so polite to you, so you don't have to be the bad guy. You should let your master decide whether to see me or not. Oh, it's young Master Raphael. Please wait a moment. The middle-aged man nodded with a smile and turned to walk inside. Not long after, the middle-aged man appeared at the door again and stepped aside. Young Master Raphael, please. Thank you. Hanjin didn't decline modestly. He didn't need to, he just walked in. The shop was deserted. A few people dressed as shop assistants were sitting around the table and whispering about something. It seemed that the withdrawal of the dwarf forging master had a great impact on this place. Hanjin was thinking as he walked up to the second floor under the guidance of the middle-aged man. In the living room on the second floor, a girl about 17 or 18 years old was sitting in the main seat. She was very beautiful. Her eyebrows were like crescent moons, and below were a pair of big eyes that seemed to be able to speak. Her pupils were blue, as pure as the sky. Her nose was straight and upturned. Her lips were slightly thin, and the two small dimples on her cheeks were like the finishing touch, making the girl more lively. Her skin was very white and tender, without any blemishes, like a beautiful painting. Even with Hanjin's experience, he was stunned for a moment. At the same time, he understood why Raphael had unrequited love in the past. Unfortunately, this was purely a toad wanting to eat swan meat. Not to mention that Raphael had ruined his family business. Even if he was young and promising, a woman like Miss Chi Li was not something that a small baron like him could afford. But at this moment, Miss Chi Li's eyes were fixed on a big man opposite her, with a bit of anger on her face. Hanjin knew this man. When they were being harassed by the town security team, it was this big man who stood up for them. Don't forget, I'm your employer. Don't tell me you can't even do something like this. Miss Chi Li finally spoke. Although her tone was very harsh, her voice was as clear and pleasant as an oriole's. The momentum she deliberately created was completely disintegrated by herself. Miss Chi Li, I have my principles. The big man touched his chin and said embarrassedly, I'm a mercenary, not a killer. I can only say that you seem to have hired the wrong person. Miss Chi Li bit her lips and said coldly, 20 gold coins. It's not about the gold coins, Mississippi. The big man raised his thick eyebrows and said in a low, muffled voice with unshakable firmness. You. Miss Chi Li was a little angry, but she was speechless after the word you. The middle-aged man walked to Miss Chi Li and whispered something. Miss Chi Li raised her head and looked at the direction of Hanjin. Young Master Raphael? Please forgive me. I'm not familiar with your name. You are? I grew up in Radon Town. You're not familiar with me. Haha, it's normal. Hanjin smiled. Although Miss Chi Li was a little abrupt and didn't even give him a seat, he still maintained his smile and politeness. Can I sit down and talk? Please sit down. Please sit down. I'm rude. Miss Chi Li forced a smile. What do you want to talk to me about? Sorry, I'm busy now, so. I know. Hanjin smiled as usual and then came straight to the point. I heard that Miss Keeley is in some trouble. I can solve this little problem for you. Oh, I didn't expect my news would spread so fast. Miss Chi Li blinked her eyes and said lightly, Excuse me, how do you want to solve the problem? You're not a professional, are you? I have the responsibility to tell you that Viller is not only a forging master, but also a high-grade combat dwarf. Violence can't solve all problems. Hanjin smiled. I'm a little confused, then you mind. Hanjin said softly, Dwarfs usually don't have a good mind. I can think of a way in this regard. Mind? That is to say, you haven't thought a way yet? Miss Chi Li showed a helpless smile, but an old man sitting beside her simply sneered. To be honest, Miss Chi Li, I know you have a high status and wide knowledge. Hanjin's face didn't change. He was quite indifferent. Viller is just a dwarf. Does he really have the courage to propose to you? It's too funny. Haha. Even if he has the courage, he should be instructed by someone or some people, right? Before seeing Miss Keeley, Hanjin still believed in the intelligence provided by Steelberg. But after seeing her, he had completely overthrown all the contents of the intelligence. Even in his era, when the female prostitute was extremely popular, the more beautiful a woman was, the more likely she would become the plaything of the class with vested interests, let alone here. Only rich and noble men were qualified to pursue a girl like Miss Chili, who had a high social status and a beautiful appearance. But a dwarf wanted to touch her? That was pure nonsense. Unless he was crazy. Miss Chi Li's face suddenly turned cold. She said word by word, "Master Raphael, are you really from Radon Town? You can send someone to ask outside, although my reputation is not very good, but I do belong here." Miss Chi Li quietly looked at Han Jin. For a moment, her face gradually softened. "Well, how will you solve my problem? I don't want to know. What I'm interested in is, what do you want from me?" At the end, Miss Chi Li showed a sweet smile. Han Jin stretched out 2 fingers. "What do you mean? 20 gold coins." Miss Chi Li was stunned. She could not help but look at the big man. She knew that the 20 gold coins was not casually asked by the big man, but she just spat it out. The old man beside Miss Chi Li stood up and walked out of the hall. The hall fell into silence. After a while, the old man came back, squinting at Han Jin. He said in a sneering tone, "Master Raphael, do you think you are worth 20 gold coins?" Miss Keeley frowned. Since entering the hall, Steelberg, who had been frightened and kept his head down, suddenly jumped out and screamed, "Bullshit! Apologize to my master at once." "Trash! Who are you talking to?" The old man was furious. He was about to rush to him. "Shut up!" Han Jin and Miss Chi Li shouted at the same time, and both of them had the same binding force to their subordinates. The old man and Stillberg both retreated angrily. "Sir, these 20 gold coins have nothing to do with me. The important thing is whether Miss Chi Li's trouble is worth 20 gold coins to solve. If you think that Miss Chi Li's trouble is not worth it, then just pretend that I didn't say anything." Han Jin said lightly. His expression still did not change, as if he did not care about the other party's molestation at all. As for whether he held a grudge in his heart, only Han Jin himself knew. "Okay, I believe you." Miss Chi Li smiled sweetly, deliberately ignoring the provocation in Han Jin's words. "Then, how many days do you need? To be honest, I can't put all my hope on you." One day. Miss Chi Li showed a surprised expression, then smiled. "Okay, then I will wait for your news." Miss Chi Li, actually I am very poor now, and my plan also requires a certain amount of money. Do you think that you should pay me a deposit first? Young Master Raphael, you're making things difficult for me. Chi Li said softly. I don't know you at all. If you take my money, are you afraid that I will run away? Han Jin laughed. His eyes fell on the big man. You forgot. You also hired a powerful mercenary. You can let him supervise me. If I really run away, he will naturally be responsible for the compensation. If I sincerely work for you, you will also solve a problem that has been giving you a headache. No matter how you look at it, you will not lose anything. The big man showed a startled expression, but Miss Chi Li's eyes moved, and she saw all the changes in the big man's expression. She nodded happily. Okay, deal. Chapter 7. Han Jin thought that the man wouldn't be nice to him for dragging him into this mess. But he didn't expect that the man's behavior was a bit strange. He just followed him and Stillberg with a calm face, as if he didn't know what kind of burden he was carrying. They could see the lights in the bar, and even hear the noise coming from the bar. Han Jin stopped, turned around, and reached out his hand to the man. Let me introduce myself. I'm Raphael, an incompetent hereditary baron who lost his family fortune. It was the first time for the man to hear such a self-deprecating self-introduction. He was a little surprised, but then he also reached out his hand. I'm Morrison's, a senior swordsman. Oh my God! Stillberg's eyes widened. His memory wasn't confused, so he clearly remembered what a senior swordsman meant. The lowest level of professions was the warrior, which was divided into high and low levels, followed by the warrior. After becoming a senior warrior, one would have to choose whether to become a swordsman or a knight. A senior swordsman would be a fighter, and a fighter was definitely a senior profession. If the professions were divided into 10 levels, a senior swordsman belonged to the 6th level. Radon Town was just a small town. Even a senior warrior would be enough to cause a shock, let alone a senior swordsman in front of him. Surprisingly, Han Jin, who had a vague understanding of professions, reacted more strongly than Stillberg. His lips became pale, and the muscles on his cheeks tightened. Morrison's could clearly feel that Han Jin's hands were trembling violently. There was no other reason. Han Jin was extremely sensitive to energy. When he held Morrison's hands, he quickly sensed the explosive energy contained in his body. That kind of energy was so huge that it had already broken through the basic unit of yuan. It was thousands of jia, or even nearly 10,000 jia. If it went one step further, it would reach the realm of xian. But 10,000 yuan was equal to 1 jia. The gap between them was too big. Even at the peak of that world, his strength couldn't be compared with the swordsman in front of him. Master Raphael, what's wrong with you? Morrison's hurriedly loosened his hands. He thought that he was too strong and hurt Han Jin. It's nothing. I just thought of something. Sorry. Han Jin forced a smile and said, There's something I need your help with. When I see the dwarf, can you cooperate with me? What do you need me to do? You don't have to do anything. Just stand behind me. Morrison thought for a while and nodded with a silly smile. Okay. Logically speaking, Han Jin shouldn't have made such a request because there was no relationship between the two of them. The reason why Morrison's agreed was because of Han Jin's appearance, temperament, tone, and smile. Although not everyone liked him, at least no one could dislike him. Walking into the bar, Han Jin found there were only a few customers, which was normal since Radon Town was just a small town. At first glance, Han Jin saw a stout guy with a height of over 1 meter sitting in front of the bar. He was talking loudly, while the bar girl opposite him was listening to him carefully with a flattering smile. Han Jin walked slowly to the dwarf and stood beside him. He said in a low voice, Sorry to disturb you. Are you Master Viller? Han Jin said, while looking at Viller. This was a dwarf who didn't like to talk about hygiene. From the side, he could clearly see the earwax in Viller's ear holes. Viller had a big beard that didn't match his height. There were even some breadcrumbs on his beard. He was wearing a shabby leather armor. The smell of alcohol and sweat mixed together was very unpleasant. The man's boots were even more worn out than his leather armor. One of his shoes had a broken toe, revealing his dirty toes. Han Jin knew that the feasibility of the plan had been greatly improved. Before leaving, he asked Miss Chi Li about Viller's situation. Miss Chi Li brought Viller from the Holy Crown City to Radon Town. Viller suddenly put forward a rude request when the weapon store was open for 2 days. That is to say, Viller hadn't received any salary yet. In addition, Viller's personal savings had been lost. He was too hot-tempered. In the Holy Crown City, he beat someone just because of a little friction. As a result, he hurt a noble. If Miss Chi Li hadn't lent him some money, Viller would have been put in prison. Go away, don't bother me. Viller didn't even look at Han Jin. He waved his hand impatiently, as if he was driving a fly away. Morrison snorted and took half a step forward. Viller suddenly turned around, glancing at the huge sword on Morrison's shoulder and the badge on Morrison's chest. After a moment, he reluctantly put down the glass and said, This young master, what can I do for you? I need you to make a set of armor for me. It's urgent. As for the price, I won't treat you badly. Han Jin said lightly. The glass in Viller's hand had been empty for a long time, but he didn't put it down for a long time, which meant that he still wanted to drink. All these characteristics showed that Viller was now in a very difficult situation. Of course, the person who manipulated him behind the scenes also gave him some money. Otherwise, Viller wouldn't have the money to open the store. But the money was not a lot. After renting the store, plus the expenses of eating and drinking these days, the money should be almost used up. I don't have time. Go find someone else. Viller flatly refused. I only want the most common set of armor, 5 gold coins. An ordinary set of armor was worth at most 1 or 2 gold coins. The price Han Jin offered was already very high. Didn't you hear me? I said I don't have time. Viller slammed the table and shouted. Viller just saw that the big mercenary was not easy to deal with, so he had no choice but to say a few perfunctory words to Hanjin. Seeing that Hanjin didn't let go, he couldn't control his temper. 10 gold coins, I can't go any higher. Hanjin smiled. I have no other choice. I must get the set of armor I want before dawn, so I gave you a price that will absolutely satisfy you. I hope you can satisfy me too. Hanjin's words had a hint of threat, but his wording was very accurate to avoid making people feel disgusted. Wow, 10 gold coins. The barmaid in the bar let out a low sigh. Viller looked at the barmaid, and then looked at Hanjin. With his personal temper, he didn't want to do anything but drink. But the price offered by the other side was really tempting. Viller showed a hesitant look. I don't know why you are still hesitating. Hanjin's face was full of friendliness. I heard that you are a qualified forging master. You can earn 10 gold coins in one night, or even half a night. If you were in the Holy Crown City, it would be the price of a magic set of armor. Viller touched his beard for a long time, then jumped down from the chair and said in a muffled voice, Come with me. Hanjin smiled and slowly followed Viller. The barmaid in the bar suddenly shouted, Hey, Mr. Viller, you haven't paid for the drinks. What are you shouting for? Are you afraid that I won't pay? Viller was so angry that his beard stood up. He turned around and roared. His roar was so loud that even the bottles on the liquor cabinet shook. After roaring, Viller's eyes glanced at Hanjin. His meaning was obvious. I just found a big business. Do I still need to worry about money? Hanjin suddenly remembered that Miss Chi Li had introduced Viller as a high-grade combat dwarf. It seemed that although his strength was not as good as Morrison's, it was not much worse. Because the guests in the bar, including the two barmaids, seemed to be very afraid of Viller. The four of them crossed half of the town and returned to Miss Chi Li's shop. It was late, and Miss Chi Li's shop had already been closed. Viller stared at the lights on the second floor. Hanjin didn't urge him, but quietly observed every change of Viller's. This was his professional habit. He always liked to look on indifferently. After a while, Viller took out a key and went to an ordinary house opposite the small building. He opened the door with the key and went straight in. The outside house was very empty. A table was placed in the corner, but there was no matching chair. Viller pushed open the door of the inner room. Hanjin also wanted to follow in. Who knew that Viller stared at the door and blocked the door? Don't you know the rules? What do you want to do? Hanjin was stunned and smiled. You misunderstood me. I just want to explain. Explain what? The armor I need is slightly different from the ordinary armor. Hanjin gestured on his chest and arms with his hands. The chest can't be blocked. The left arm can be forged as normal, but the right arm should be exposed, and the back. Hanjin explained a lot, and Viller's eyes were getting bigger and bigger. Finally, he could not help but interrupt Hanjin. What do you want such armor for? You don't have to worry about that. Hanjin said lightly. Otherwise, I can go to the opposite side and buy it casually. Why should I spend money to ask you to forge it for me? Viller shook his head, muttered something, and slammed the door. Hanjin's ears were very good. He heard Viller say, Poor guy, his head must have been kicked by the beasts in the forest. Chapter 8. Usually it was easy to make money in big cities and then go to small cities to spend money. Hanjin made money from big shots. Although he used 10 gold coins as bait and 1 gold coin to change other people's impression of Raphael, he only got 9 gold coins. But in Radon Town, 9 gold coins was a huge amount of money. Therefore, Hanjin's life was very happy now. He ate and lived in the hotel every day, and people in the town also changed their attitude towards him. When he walked on the street, people greeted him with a smile. Of course, Hanjin was a very polite person, no matter whether he knew them or not. He always responded with a smile. This day, after breakfast, Hanjin and Morrison's went back to their room. Hanjin was leisurely sitting on the chair, while Morrison seemed to have something to say. He hesitated for a while, and then said, I say, are we going to stay here like this? It's too boring. And Hanjin was enjoying the satisfaction brought by the energy. Hearing this, he couldn't help but smile. Hanjin was a clever person. He knew what Morrison's meant. It was not a good idea to just sit around and eat. And Morrison's didn't want to be a freeloader, so he always rushed to pay the bill. He was worried about the future. When Han Jin was about to say something, Stillberg suddenly pushed the door open and rushed in. Young master, Miss Chi Li and others have left. Some people came to trouble Miss Chi Li. Han Jin was stunned. When did they leave? I don't know. Stillberg shook his head. I waited downstairs for a long time in the morning, but I didn't see anyone coming in or out. When I was about to come back, I saw a group of people breaking in, but they didn't find anything and came out again. Raphael, you let Stillberg go out every morning just for... Morrison's suddenly understood. He must have received the letter last night and left Radon Town overnight. Han Jin had no time to talk to Morrison's. He stood up and thought for a moment. What do they look like? Young master, that they all look very noble and not to be trifled with. They're still there. It should still be here. Let's go take a look. Young master, please don't. Stillberg said timidly. Strictly speaking, he wasn't worried for himself, but for Han Jin. As a servant of a hereditary noble, Stillberg had some knowledge. Those people seemed to be rich and noble. Even the old master was far inferior to those people in terms of aura. If something happened, no one could save them. Let's go, Han Jin said in an unquestionable tone. After a while, Han Jin took Stillberg to the small building, followed by Morrison's. Those people didn't leave. They were standing in front of the building and discussing something in low voice. In front of the building, there were more than 10 tall war horses, all of which were pure white, without a single strand of mixed hair. In fact, there was no need to observe those people. Just by looking at the war horses, one could already know the status of those people. The leader of the group was about 30 years old, with thin cheeks, wearing a fiery red armor. His eyes exuded a threatening aura. Manhanna, the mayor of Radon Town, stood beside him, nodding and bowing with a flattering smile on his face. Raphael, there are 4 senior knight among them. We can't afford to offend them. Morrison said word by word. And that guy in red, I can't see his strength at all. Do you know what this means? I already know. Han Jin laughed. Compared with Morrison's, Han Jin looked much calmer. In fact, he had already prepared himself before coming here. How could a small baron dare to offend someone who could force Miss Chi Li, a celebrity in the Holy Crown City, into such a situation? You already know? Aren't you going to fight? Then what are we doing here? Morrison's was stunned. He thought that Han Jin liked Miss Chi Li secretly, so he wanted to teach those people a lesson and stop them from pestering Miss Chi Li. Morrison's came here to help, but unfortunately, his courage disappeared at once at the sight of Roland. Who said I'm going to fight? I told you, violence can't solve everything. Han Jin pointed at his head. Some brain, understand. Morrison's rolled his eyes. At this time, the man in the red robe also noticed Han Jin and whispered something to Manhanna. Then Manhanna's eyes also fell on Han Jin, and he started to explain. A trace of contempt flashed through the eyes of the man in the red robe, and he didn't look at Han Jin again. 2 knight galloped from the other end of the street and rushed to the front of the small building in the blink of an eye. They reined their horses together, and their movements were uniform, as if they had practiced it thousands of times. One of the knight whispered, Sir, we found some clues in the west of the town. Get on the horses. The man in red shouted. After a while, the group of uninvited guests gradually disappeared in the distance. Mayor Manhanna showed a sinister smile and waved his hand. Several members of the security team came forward and put a seal on the door of the shop. Then Manhanna hesitated and slowly walked to Han Jin. Good morning, young Master Raphael. Mayor Manhanna, long time no see. You're getting younger and younger. Han Jin casually said, By the way, who are those people? Ho ho. They're all big shots in the Holy Crown City. They are real nobles. Manhanna deliberately put on a very mysterious look. Oh, Han Jin nodded. He could hear the sarcasm in Manhanna's words. If they were real nobles, then who was the fake one? Undoubtedly, it was Han Jin, but he didn't intend to fight back. Now is not the time to fall out with Manhanna. Young Master Raphael, I have something to do, so I can't chat with you. Manhanna smiled. Han Jin smiled and nodded again. When Manhanna walked away, he asked softly, Stillberg, is this guy always so sarcastic? That's right. He's not a good person. Master used to look down on him when he was alive. Look down on him. Han Jin noticed something. Aren't you afraid that guy will do something bad in secret? How dare he? Stillberg said proudly. Once, Master even scolded him to his face. What did he dare to do? Aren't you still smiling obediently? Han Jin sighed. He originally thought that Manhanna hated Stillberg because he peeped at his family taking a bath. But now it seemed that it was not the case, at least not completely. Although it was normal to kick a man when he was down, there were always some hidden meanings behind hitting him when he was down. Raphael, I know you like Miss Chile, but I'll tell you the truth. Don't be angry, but Morrison stammered. What do you know? Who said I like Miss Chile? Han Jin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who are you trying to fool? Do you think I'm that dwarf? Morrison squinted at Han Jin and looked very contemptuous. You don't like her? You don't like to let Stillberg come here every day? Han Jin was a little speechless. He really cared about Miss Chile, but this kind of care was by no means love. It turned out that his plan was very good. On the one hand, he solved the problem of Miss Chile. On the other hand, he taught the person who spoke rudely a lesson and established his own status. At least, people would not dare to offend him. In this way, he could get closer to Miss Chile. She had money, and he thought that he was relatively smart. They could cooperate with each other and get what they wanted. In the current situation, it was a good choice to be a doghead military advisor, which could quickly exchange for a certain amount of living capital. But man proposes, God disposes. The dwarf Villar's character was too violent. He even killed Miss Chile. As a result, he completely angered Miss Chile. But until now, Han Jin still did not give up. He hoped that through some efforts, he could win the understanding of Miss Chile. It must be admitted that Han Jin was a good person. If he tried to contact those uninvited guests and made up some things related to Miss Chile, he might be able to exchange for what he wanted. But he did not have this idea at all. After all, his plan was not thorough enough, which directly led to the death of Miss Chile's family. He owed a debt, and the debt had to be paid. In addition, from the perspective of human nature, a group of people used various means to oppress the beautiful Miss Chile. A normal man would certainly sympathize with the latter, and Han Jin was no exception. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Han Jin avoided the topic. Morrisons, you said there were 4 senior knight among them? Yes, why? How are they compared with you? You mean who is better at fighting? Yes. I am a senior swordsman, and they are senior knight. We are the same grade. Who is better at fighting? We can only know after we fight. Aren't there a lot of experts like you? This question was very important for Han Jin. Morrison's had been his goal to surpass. If his ideas could be realized one by one, he was confident that he could surpass Morrison's in 1 or 2 years. It depends on the place. If we are in this small radon town, I am this. Morrison's gave a thumbs up. If we are in the Holy Crown City, I am this. Morrison's gave a thumbs up again. Oh, Han Jin smiled, but his smile was a bit bitter at this moment. Do you know Dismark, the Lord of the Holy Crown City? He is the supreme knight of the light element. He is a super strong man who can fight against a dragon. Morrison sighed. A senior swordsman like me is nothing compared to him. Han Jin waved his hand, hinting Morrison's to stop talking. Although his confidence had suffered an extremely cruel and inhumane blow, deep in his heart, there was a flame raging, and it was getting stronger and stronger. These days, Morrison's told him about the situation outside. The continent was falling apart. Dozens of lords were fighting each other, and the war was endless. Radon Town was a paradise without any attractive benefits, so neither the army nor the robbers came here. But now it was peaceful. It didn't mean it would be peaceful all the time. If something happened, the whole town, including Han Jin, would become helpless dogs waiting for death. He didn't care what others thought, but at least he, Han Jin, would never accept such an ending. Thank you for your support. I know where my weakness is. I will try my best to write this book. The new book list is limited by the fact that more than 150,000 words will be automatically removed from the list. so I have to take it easy and can't release all the chapters. Please forgive me. Yesterday, I released tens of thousands of chapters, and now I have about 100,000 chapters left. I will release them after the new book list is released. And I am still saving words, and I will break out soon. Finally, I beg for your votes and favorites. Please help me. Chapter 9. Author's Note. After reading the book review, a friend told me not to change my name. I think it makes sense. From now on, I'll use Raphael. Raphael's confidence took a hit. He lowered his head and walked back to the inn. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He focused on thinking about something. Raphael was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't see a carriage coming towards him. Fortunately, Morrison shouted from behind to remind Raphael. The coachman also turned to the side in time to avoid an accident. "I'm sorry," Raphael said apologetically. Unexpectedly, the coachman didn't pay any attention to him and drove the carriage further and further away. "Raphael, what are you thinking about?" Morrison's came over and patted Raphael's shoulder. "Nothing," Raphael said listlessly. Morrison saw that Raphael was in a bad mood, so he didn't ask. The three of them walked forward in silence. When they reached the entrance of the inn, Raphael suddenly stopped and whispered, "Something's wrong." "What's wrong?" "That carriage. What's wrong with that carriage?" Raphael frowned. Although being a detective used to be a side job to support his family, he was used to looking for all kinds of abnormal clues. Because he was too engrossed just now, he didn't notice it until now. Under normal circumstances, the coachman would scream when he saw someone running into the carriage. At least it would save him a lot of effort. After he apologized, the coachman didn't respond. In fact, it was normal for the coachman to scold him. However, it was strange that the coachman acted as if nothing had happened. Could it be that the coachman knew him? "Morrison's, do you think Miss Chi is in that carriage?" Raphael said slowly. He wasn't sure about his guess. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked. "That carriage? It can't be. Didn't Miss Chi leave a long time ago?" "Hard to say." Raphael paused. "If Miss Chi and the others pretend to be smart and want to lead the pursuers away before leaving the town, then they will be in trouble. Those knights are obviously well-trained and not easy to fool." Morrison's froze for a moment and looked at Raphael. Raphael was also looking at Morrison's. Their eyes met, but they both looked away. They both thought of the same question at the same time. Should they chase after the carriage? "Let's go back." Raphael made his decision. "That's all right." Morrison's answer was somewhat reluctant. It was not that his moral character was lower than Raphael's. The key was that he had been born and raised in this world. The bloody fact he had seen and heard told him that good people who did good deeds usually did not live long. Raphael, on the other hand, was a modern man. Although he had heard about the chaos of the outside world, seeing was believing. His understanding of reality was far less than Morrison's. Unfortunately, the two of them were not destined to be good people. When they rushed back to where they came from, the carriage was long gone. They chased it all the way to the outskirts of the town, but they couldn't find any trace of the carriage. "What should we do?" Morrison's asked. "What else can we do? Let's go back." Raphael shrugged. At this point, there was nothing he could do. If Miss Chi was really in the carriage, she would have run away as soon as they reached the outskirts of the town. God knows how far they would have gone by now. As if to verify Raphael's guess, the three returned to the inn and chatted for a while. Suddenly, the sound of horses galloping broke the silence of the town. Raphael hurriedly went to the window and looked out. He saw the knight jumping off their horses and stopping the pedestrians to ask questions. During this time, very few people or carriages had left the town. More than one person had seen the carriage. Moreover, the knight was very generous. After a while, the knight had found the answer they wanted. They jumped on their horses and chased after the carriage. "It's over," Raphael sighed. He had told Morrison's that violence could not solve all problems. In fact, the so-called brain was the same. No matter how smart he was, he could not do anything about this. The situation had changed too quickly. Unless he had the power to stop all the night, he could only watch. He had thought of helping Miss Chi before, But that was before the crisis. Now that it had happened, what else could he do? Do you want me to go outside and take a look? Morrison said slowly. It's no use. Raphael shook his head and reached for the bread on the table. It was the food he had saved for himself. Then, he lazily lay on the bed. After absorbing energy from food for a long time, he had developed a habit. When he was in a bad mood, he would want to eat. When he was in a good mood, he would also want to eat. Just like a drunkard and a smoker. Then you stay here. Stillberg, let's go out for a walk. Morrison's pushed the door open and walked out. Sigh. The young master must be very sad now. When they were outside, Stillberg no longer hid his emotions. He showed a worried face. What did you say? Morrison's asked in surprise. Can't you tell? The young master really likes Miss Chi. Really? Morrison's opened his eyes wide. He had used this topic to tease Raphael before, but it was just a joke. Why would I lie to you? Raphael. Morrison's paused for a moment. If this is over, it will only be good for Raphael. There will be no harm. What do you mean? Stillberg said angrily. Don't be angry. Morrison's laughed. Although Stillberg was not capable and had a low status, he had never looked down on Stillberg. Think about it. Raphael and Miss Chi. Is it possible? Stillberg was stunned for a long time. He shook his head sadly. But the young master will not be happy. Being unhappy is better than being miserable for the rest of his life. Morrison's university said. Then he said something that Raphael used to say to Stillberg. You're still young, so there are some things that you don't understand. Stillberg curled his lips. They had become familiar with each other in the past few days. Although Morrison's was tall and bearded, he was only 21 years old. If Morrison's was not a high-grade swordsman, he would have jumped up and refuted. Raphael had already eaten a few pieces of bread. His whole body became motionless. Even the rise and fall of his chest became slower and slower. Training was not only about absorbing energy, but also about cultivating one's chi. After some time, a series of hurried footsteps woke Raphael up from his meditation. As soon as Raphael opened his eyes, the door was pushed open. Morrison's walked in with a smile. Stillberg followed behind him with a happy face. Haha, Raphael, don't pretend to be a prophet in front of me. Morrison's laughed. What? Raphael sat up. Those knight are back. Morrison's pointed at the window. See for yourself if you don't believe me. Raphael walked to the window and looked out again. He saw a few knight figures, but there were much fewer of them. There were only 4 of them. They came back empty-handed. Raphael was surprised. Young master, they brought the carriage back, but there was no one in it. Where's the coachman? How would we know? Morrison's asked. Where are the other knight? I don't know. It seems that I underestimated Miss Chi. Or maybe someone taught her. Otherwise, my prophet, you're using your astrology again? Morrison shook his head and sneered. No matter what you say, I won't believe you. Whatever. Raphael did not bother to argue. Let's not talk about this anymore. No matter what happens to Miss Chi in the future, it has nothing to do with us. I just don't believe. Morrison's was still shaking his head. The bickering guy did not even wait for the rest of the conversation to finish and expressed his objection. As it turned out, Moxing's attainment in astrology was far greater than Raphael's. When it was almost noon, hundreds of knights suddenly broke into the town and drove all the residents to the square in the center of the town. Even the few women in the town were dragged out of the square in the middle of the town. Raphael and Morrison's were no exception. The knight who chased them away was originally very rude, but after recognizing Morrison's identity, his attitude softened a lot. Obviously, they did not want unnecessary bloodshed. Not only did the number of knight increase by more than 20 times, but the commander had also changed. The leader who wore a red battle robe in the morning was also here. He and a few other officers who seemed to be of similar status stood below. On the stairs, there was a young man in a white robe. The young man's appearance and figure were not outstanding, but his white robe was very eye-catching, especially the golden streamline inlaid on the white robe, which glittered under the direct sunlight. Also, the young man seemed to be very agitated. From time to time, he would hurriedly walk back and forth. Otherwise, He would shout a few words and constantly gesticulate. The flustered and exasperated look he revealed was clearly inconsistent with the graceful and luxurious white robe symbolized. The mayor of Radon Town, Manhanna, appeared. He plucked up his courage and wanted to say a few words to the young man, but as soon as he opened his mouth, the young man gave him a heavy slap in the face. Then Two Knight took Manhanna down the stairs and threw him into the crowd. Chapter 10. I hope to satisfy all the readers. Although I know it's unrealistic, I have been working hard for this goal. Now, I want to say, brothers, I have a stockpile of chapters. Yesterday, I changed it to Raphael and spent a lot of time. Now, I have to change it back. I'm speechless. How about this? I will try my best to reduce the number of appearances of Raphael. I will still use Han Jin as the name. After the scene changes, I will replace Raphael with a title. Just like what Stillberg said, Han Jin will always be the young master. This should satisfy everyone as much as possible. However, I have to undergo surgery again. Some of the plots where Raphael appears more often have to be rewritten. Until now, I haven't written any new chapters. Even the mayor was treated like this, let alone the others. If they walked a little slower, they would be heavily whipped. These knights all had tyrannical strength. Although they did not release their combat power, their inconspicuous whips could easily tear the outer clothes and skin, leaving deep wounds on people's bodies as if they were cut by a knife. Every time the whips landed, a rain of blood would splash out. There were even torn flesh that burst out. No matter if it was a young man, an old man, or a woman, as long as someone was hit by the whips, they would be smashed to the ground on the spot. Those with good physical strength could still cry a few times, while those with poor physical strength simply fainted. Han Jin looked on coldly. He found that only some knights were particularly ruthless, while the other knights used their hands to push and kick to drive the crowd away. Although it was also a kind of violence, compared to the former, they were extremely benevolent. The sun shone down from the sky, but the warm sunlight could not dispel the coldness in people's hearts. Thousands of people gathered in the square, and it was silent as if they were waiting for something. Many knights scattered into small groups and began to search from house to house. The way they entered was very aggressive, and the way they searched was even more aggressive. This could be proven by the continuous sounds of breaking and collapsing. Are they just going to do this? No one cares about them? Han Jin asked in a low voice. He was asking Stillberg, but before Stillberg answered, someone behind him answered, "My young master, please keep your voice down. They're the guards of the Holy Crown City." Han Jin turned back, and the one who spoke was the captain of the town security team, Safani. In fact, Safani was very tall, but now he tried to bend his waist, as if being short could guarantee his safety. In the current situation, the original conflict could be ignored because it was meaningless. The two of them looked at each other and smiled bitterly at the same time. The knights moved very fast. It didn't take long for them to turn the whole town upside down. Seeing the knights coming back empty-handed, the expression of the young man standing at the head became more and more stiff, more and more disappointed, and finally evolved into a kind of viciousness sharper than a steel needle. That kind of viciousness was so clear that even Han Jin, who was standing hundreds of meters away, felt a chill in his heart. Finally, all the knights came back. The young man flung his robe and walked to his horse. "Sir, here," a knight asked in a low voice. "Kill them all." The young man's answer reverberated over the town. "Kill them all?" Han Jin could hardly believe his ears. There were thousands of people gathered in the square. Kill them all? Just because they didn't find Miss Chi Li, they had to kill them all? Not only Han Jin was shocked, but also those knights were stunned. They didn't move for a long time, but there were still some willing to obey the order, including any order. About 20 knights had pulled out their swords and rushed to the crowd. The unlucky Mayor Manhanna was the first to be cut down. Then his daughter, the girl Stillberg peeked at in the middle of the night, had her neck cut off by a sharp sword. The crowd was in an uproar, screaming and fleeing to the outside of the square. Han Jin had been desperate, but now he found a turning point. The knights around the square seemed to have some doubts, or they didn't actively block the fleeing crowd. Could it be that they couldn't accept such an absurd and cruel order? But now was not the time to think about it. Hanjin and the other two turned around and began to run with the crowd. Hanjin's body had been modified many times, so running was definitely not a problem for him. Stillberg, who was not in good physical condition, used all his potential and followed Hanjin closely. Morrison's, on the other hand, had put away his medal and was clumsily holding his sword under his armpit. He was running like a duck. He was afraid that he would attract the attention of some aggressive guy. If he was stopped, he would be finished. Morrison's didn't dare to release his combat power, and the knights didn't want to release their combat power. They just waved their swords randomly, occasionally cutting down one or two people, but most people still rushed past them. When they were near the town, Morrison suddenly sped up, grabbed Stillberg, who was running slower and slower, threw Stillberg on his shoulder, and overtook Hanjin in a few steps, whispering, "Hurry up, keep up." Hanjin took a deep breath and suddenly sped up a lot, following Morrison's closely. Hanjin didn't use his energy all the time. What a damn world! He was really afraid of encountering any more accidents. The energy was his last magic weapon, and he wouldn't use it unless it was a last resort. The whole field was full of people running away, crying for their parents and calling for their children. For the people of Radon Town, today's experience was no less than the end of the world. The three people swam across the Chui River and rushed into the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. Only then did they feel relieved. Just when Morrison's put Stillberg on the ground, Stillberg bent over and vomited violently. He was dizzy all the way, and once his feet touched the ground, he couldn't control the nausea in his chest and abdomen. "Damn it, who said that Lord Dismark is a good man?" Stillberg shouted weakly. "Be satisfied. If it were Zagund of Blackraven City, your head would have been chopped off." Morrison sat down on the ground. In the distance, there were even more people rushing into the forest, and those who broke into the forest all headed towards the depths of the forest. Although they did not know where to go, they had to at least run a little further than their peers so that they could temporarily ensure their safety. "Morrison's, tell me, if those knights really kill all the people in the town, won't they be punished?" Hanjin asked word by word. "Punishment? Don't joke around. Do you know who they are?" Morrison sneered. "I know, they're the guards of the Holy Crown City." "Then it's over. Who will punish them? Dismark?" Morrison's shook his head. "The guard of the main force of Dismark. Unless Dismark doesn't want to be the Lord anymore." Hanjin sighed. "It's good that you understand." Hanjin sat down next to Morrison's and lowered his head in silence. What happened today had touched him too much. After all, he was a modern man, and the scale of bloody scenes he had seen were limited. What's more, he found that his previous experience paled in comparison to the current social and cultural environment. If something similar happened again, he would definitely run away as soon as he knew that Miss Chi Li had suddenly left. It would never be like today. "Prophet, what are you thinking about?" Morrison's asked curiously. Hanjin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook off Morrison's arm on his shoulder and asked, "What should we do next?" "You're the prophet. It's up to you." Morrison's grinned. Hanjin couldn't help but take a serious look at Morrison's. When they were running away, Morrison's was as nervous as him. But in a short time, he had returned to normal. This guy must have experienced a lot before. "I've never been outside. You want me to tell you? Did you grow up in Radon Town?" Morrison's was a little surprised. "Yes, but I feel you seem to know a lot of things. I've read a lot of books." Puff! Stillberg couldn't help laughing. "What are you laughing at?" Hanjin glared at him. Morrison's looked at Hanjin and Stillberg. He felt that Hanjin was deliberately hiding something. After a while, he said slowly, "How about we go back to Radon Town tonight? Or we go north to the Bite Man?" "Go back to Radon Town?" "Morrison's, are you crazy?" Stillberg exclaimed. "That guy's just venting his anger." Hanjin looked at the running figure in the field. "If he wants to kill us for any purpose, we can't escape at all." "You're right." Morrison's nodded. "But, Master, we can't go back. It's dangerous to go back." Hanjin looked at Morrison's. "Morrison's, What kind of place is the Bite Man? The Bite Man is a very strange country. Danger and opportunity coexist. It seems very chaotic, but as time goes by, you will find that the Bite Man has its own rules. You think you have seen through the rules, but you'll find that under the cover of the rules, it's a shocking chaos. Did you come up with these words? It's my teacher who said it. Huh. Where's your teacher now? Morrison's looked gloomy and shook his head. Let's not talk about this. Chapter 11. According to what you said, I feel that Bite Man is not a safe place. Han Jin naturally changed the topic. It's a paradise for adventurers. If it's very safe, there's no need to talk about adventure. A voice came. Han Jin looked up and saw a young man in his 20s. His cheeks were a little thin. He had a pair of thick sword-like eyebrows, clear eyes, and a straight nose. He was not tall, wearing a very common gray robe. His chest was still moving up and down slightly, and he was breathing rapidly. It seemed that he had just exercised. He should be a member of the fleeing army. Mr. Sasu, it's you. Stillbird jumped up. The young man was a little surprised. Do you know me? This time last year, I've been listening to your stories. Don't you remember me? Sasu looked at Stillberg seriously and shook his head. I'm sorry, I can't remember. Stillberg jumped to Han Jin's side. This is our young master Raphael. Can't you remember? Oh, Sasu showed an expression of understanding. It's young Master Raphael, long time no see. Hello. Han Jin smiled. He knew clearly that the young man remembered him just out of politeness. Are you a magician? Morrison's suddenly interrupted. Sasu was stunned and nodded slowly. Yes, you are senior swordsman, Morrison's. Morrison slightly bent. Are you also from Radon Town? Yes. Sasu smiled bitterly. I just arrived at Radon Town last night, but I didn't expect to encounter such a thing today. Young master, look. The town is on fire. Stillbird shouted. They turned around and looked towards the direction of Radon Town. Above the town, a cloud of black smoke rose straight into the sky. Only the rich could build their houses with bricks and tiles. Most of the houses in Radon Town were made of wood. Moreover, someone deliberately set fire to the houses, so the fire was out of control in a flash. Cries sounded again. Many people rushed out of the jungle and looked at the direction of Radon Town in a daze. Their faces were full of pain. The fire had burned all their hopes. It seems that we have to go to the Bite Man. Han Jin whispered. Mr. Sasu, where are you going? Me? I'm one of the Bite Man. Let's go together. Morrison's invited him. Sasu's eyes fell on Morrison's huge sword, and then he nodded. Okay. In fact, they all knew that a swordsman was fragile, and so was a magician. But the combination of swordsman and magician was not as simple as 1 + 1 is equal to 2. It was good for both of them to cooperate. Let's go to the town tonight, and then set off tomorrow morning. Han Jin said slowly. No, we have to go now. Sasu interrupted. Why? Han Jin asked in surprise. Tell me first, what are you going to do in the town tonight? Let's go back and see if there's anything we can use. For example, money. Even if you can find more money, what's the use of money if you lose your life? You mean those knights won't leave? It has nothing to do with them. Sasu hesitated for a moment. Let me tell you, the army of Black Raven City is coming. How do you know? Morrison's University was surprised. I was going to find a friend in Black Raven City, but I didn't expect to run into their army on the way. Fortunately, I was alert otherwise. Sasu smiled bitterly. The army of Black Raven City is known for its speed. If we wait until tomorrow morning, we won't be able to leave. Han Jin nodded thoughtfully. When he turned around, he saw the old butler Babato and some members of the security team coming in from the woods. He suddenly thought of something and said to Stillberg, Stillberg, go tell them this news, and let them spread the news as much as possible. Yes, young master. Stillberg trotted to Babato and the others. Sasu's eyes lit up, but he didn't say anything. The deeper they went into the mountains, the thicker the woods became. The sunlight couldn't penetrate the woods at all, so the atmosphere was somewhat gloomy. Han Jin and the others walked through the woods, chatting in low voices. Sassu was a talkative person, and unlike Morrison's, he didn't hide his past. From his words, Hanjin learned a lot. Dismark, the lord of Holy Crown City, and Zagund, the lord of Black Raven City, were mortal enemies. The religions they believed in and practiced were so opposite that they couldn't live under the same sky. This hatred could be traced back hundreds of years. Dismark and Zagund had fought against each other dozens of times. In other words, in order to destroy each other, they had launched dozens of wars, but no one could gain the upper hand. Zagund, the lord of Black Raven City, was a descendant of dark druids. He was not only powerful, but also had the ability to control evil creatures. In Black Raven City, there were millions of mutated crows. Every time Zagund went out to battle, millions of crows would form a dark cloud and hover over the army. Although the mutated crows weren't powerful, they were the best sentinels. They could easily monitor the enemy's every move and intercept the enemy scouts. Zagund's core troops were composed of vampires and dark druids, with a small number of dark knight and wizard. They were powerful and swift in action. This time, Zagund gave up his previous style of advancing head-on. Instead, he led the army to climb over the mountains and try to stab Dismark in the back. This pushed Radon Town, which used to be peaceful, to the top of the storm. But for the people of Radon Town, everything was meaningless because Radon Town had been turned into a ruin. At dusk, Hanjin and the others found a place to camp. Morrison's was responsible for hunting. Stillbird was looking for some branches that could be ignited. Hanjin and Sassu had nothing to do. After cleaning up a place, they both sat down. Hanjin looked at Sassu with great interest. From the bottom of his heart, he liked this man with rich experience. Sassu had traveled around the continent as a bard and had visited many places. He just knew that most of what Stillbird knew was from Sassu, who traveled to Radon Town last year. If he could talk more with Sassu, it would definitely fill up his own gaps. By the way, since you know that Black Raven City is going to attack, why do you still come to Radon Town? Hanjin asked in a low voice. One reason is that I want to visit a friend in Holy Crown City. He's a businessman. If the war breaks out suddenly, it will affect him greatly. Another reason is, Dismark has a good reputation, so I want to remind him. You have a lot of friends, huh? Hanjin laughed. Then why did you decide to go to the Bite Man with us? I guess you haven't seen Lord Dismark yet, have you? Since the future Lord of Holy Crown City is such a person, what's the point? To be honest, I'm very disappointed. What about your friend? Don't you care about him? What a coincidence. I just saw him in Radon Town. Sassu, you want to send a message to Dismark just because he has a good reputation? Sassu was stunned and then smiled. Of course, for me, this is a good opportunity to recommend myself. If I can get Dismark's appreciation, I won't have to wander around anymore. You want to work for Dismark? Then, Dismark is old, and I'm still young. After I gain a foothold in Holy Crown City, who do you think I should build a good relationship with? Sassu asked back. Is that guy Dismark's son? Yes. Sassu nodded. At this time, Stillberg came back with a bunch of branches. Hanjin stood up and helped Stillberg to put the branches on the ground. Suddenly, he remembered something, turned around and asked, Sassu, you said you met your friend in Radon Town? Is your friend a man or a woman? A man. Why do you ask? Nothing. You scared me. I thought your friend was Miss Chi Li. Hanjin didn't want to tell him about Miss Chi Li, but since Sassu was so frank, he couldn't hide it anymore. Chi Li. Miss Chi Li of Holy Crown City? Sassu was stunned. She is also in Radon Town. Yes. Sassu stood up slowly, with a hesitant look on his face. Don't worry. Miss Chi Li has left Radon Town last night. Hanjin observed his expression and smiled. In fact, Dismark's son went crazy because he couldn't find Miss Chi Li. Sassu, do you know Miss Chi Li? How could I know her? Sassu shook his head, but I heard from my friend that she's a kind-hearted girl, just like you, a good person. I'm a good person? How can you tell that I'm a good person? Hanjin laughed. When you heard the news of Black Raven City's attack, you immediately told the people in Radon Town that you were worried about their safety. And, are you a noble? It's the first time for me to see a noble helping his servant. It's really amazing. What a bullshit noble. I'm just a homeless refugee. Han Jin said with self-mockery. Chapter 12. With a plop, Morrisons threw the little boar on his shoulder to the ground. He looked at Han Jin and said, "Is it enough? Shall I take a look around? Such a big boar. It must be at least 50 kilograms, right? It should be enough for us to eat. What's the point of taking a look around?" Sasso laughed. Stillberg had already set up the firewood. He reached into his pocket and said, "Young master, this is bad. We left in a hurry and didn't bring any fire. There's a magician here. Why would he need fire?" Morrisons curled his lips. Sasso laughed. Without any movement, a ball of fire the size of a fist appeared in his palm. It landed on the firewood, and the fire burned fiercely. You're really a magician?" Stillberg stuttered. His eyes were full of reverence. "What's there to be surprised about?" Sasso laughed. "You'll know when you get to the bite, man. There are many magicians like me. Mr. Sassu, can I learn magic? It's hard to say. I'm just a magician. I'm not qualified to appraise others. If you really want to learn magic, you should go to the Magic Academy." "Oh," Stillberg replied dispiritedly. He knew very well that it was impossible. Even if he went to the Magic Academy one day, he would take care of the young master in the name of a servant. Moxink stretched out his foot and flipped the boar over like a wooden stick, exposing its gray belly. Moxink stabbed down with his huge sword. The seemingly not sharp sword easily pierced into the boar's throat. Then, Moxink waved his hand and cut open the boar's belly. Bang! Moxink waved his hand and cut the boar's belly in half. Han Jin had been paying attention to Morrison's movements, and Morrisons was playing the role of a butcher. The great sword in his hand danced casually, and his movements were agile and swift. He had a good grasp of his strength, and with just a few light flicks, he was able to clean out the wild boar's innards. Under the fire, the aroma of the meat gradually spread out. The few of them chatted as they waited. Seeing that it was about time, Morrisons grabbed half of the thigh and started chewing. Stillberg was stunned. He reached out and grabbed a big piece of meat, but he was no match for Morrisons. Before he could put the meat into his mouth, he suddenly screamed and threw the meat to the ground. Then, he blew on his fingers. "What are you fighting for?" Sassu asked in confusion. "Umph." Morrisons snorted a few times, but his tone was strange. It was hard to tell if he was mocking or criticizing himself. Stillberg reluctantly grabbed a branch and pierced it into the meat. Then he held the meat and hid aside, eating it in small bites. "I really don't understand you guys." Sassu shook his head. "You guys eat first. I'm going to meditate." Morrisons and Stillberg looked at Sassu sympathetically, but they did not remind him. Only those who had experienced it themselves knew how scary reality was. In the past few days, the two of them had more or less understood Han Jin. They believed that Han Jin's appetite was limitless. He did not eat all day because he was afraid that he would not have enough money to spend, not because he could not eat. When it came to eating, Han Jin was never shy. Currently, he could only absorb energy from food, and energy was the foundation of everything. Without energy, he could not do anything. Han Jin grabbed half of the thigh and put it to his mouth. His movements seemed elegant, but in reality, the speed at which he ate the food was several times faster than Morrison's. Morrisons needed to chew before swallowing the food. This kind of action was superfluous for Han Jin. If his body was big enough, he could even swallow the wild boar whole. His unimaginable digestive ability provided him with a strong guarantee. He could only starve to death, but he would not be stuffed to death. Feeling traces of energy entering his body was the happiest moment for Han Jin. Every bit of energy added to his body was a bit more satisfaction, a bit more security, and a bit more hope. When Stillberg was full and leaned against a tree to stretch, Han Jin had already eaten half of the wild boar. When he finished his meditation and slowly walked back, he saw a bonfire burning. The bonfire was empty, but the ground was full of bones. "No way. This knowledgeable bard couldn't believe his eyes at this moment. He, Morrison's laughed gloatingly. Huh. Stillberg laughed too. That's for you. Hanjin pointed at half of the wild boar's head on a leaf with a happy smile on his face. He had a reason to be happy. A few pieces of bread could provide him less than $1 of energy, and meat could provide much more energy than bread. After eating this wild boar, his body was filled with hundreds of dollars of energy. How could he not be happy? In the past, when he was looking for food in the forest, he did not dare to go too deep because he did not know much about the magical beasts. This time, it was all thanks to Morrison's. Cessation was about to say something when an annoying noise came from afar. The source of the noise was approaching at a very fast speed. Cessation's face changed greatly. Oh no, it's the Black Crows. You guys go first. Sasu and I will stay. Morrison shouted in a low voice. Stillberg, leave now. Young master, what about you? I'll stay. Hanjin was not a reckless person, but sometimes he had to face what he had to face, or at least face it together with his companions. There would always be someone stronger than him. Unless he could reach the highest position, there would always be danger. If he ran into danger and avoided it, he might have to rely on others for protection for the rest of his life. His self-esteem would not allow him to do that. Besides, the danger was not clear yet. Since Morrison's was in a fighting stance, it meant that there was room for him to maneuver around. This was also a chance for him to prove his strength and compare the difference between them. Why should he leave? Young master, if you don't leave, I won't leave either. Stillberg gritted his teeth. It's too late. Don't make a sound. Sasu said in a low voice. He waved his hand, and a ball of soil floated up from the ground and buried the bonfire. Then, he began to chant a spell in a low voice. A faint circle of light enveloped them all. Hanjin suddenly realized that their shadows had disappeared. What kind of magic was this? Hanjin could not help but open his eyes wide. The noise was getting closer and closer. Hanjin and the others could clearly see a very agile figure jumping around in the branches and leaves. Behind the figure and above it, there were thousands of crows cawing and chasing after it. It was like a living dark cloud. Although one or a few crows would fall every time the figure turned around, there were just too many of them. Help or not? Morrison's said in a very low voice. The silhouette suddenly paused and looked in that direction. It seemed like he had heard voices, but in that short moment, the circling black crows had already cut off his escape route. They surrounded him firmly on a large tree and started to attack him madly. The figure was an archer, but at this moment, shooting arrows was meaningless. He leaned against the tree trunk and used his longbow to block with all his might. Although the crows could only attack with their sharp beaks and claws, they had the advantage in numbers. The figure blocked left and right and gradually fell into a disadvantage. It was only a matter of time before he was defeated. Sasu chanted a few spells in a low voice and suddenly walked out of the light. He waved his hand, and a green net-like object with a diameter of more than 30 meters appeared out of thin air. It covered most of the crows and the figure. The crows were affected by the spell, and their flying speed suddenly slowed down. Then, they fell down like raindrops. In the blink of an eye, they formed a mountain of crows on the ground. The crows that were lucky enough to escape the spell screeched and changed their direction, approaching Sasu from all angles. Morrison's university shouted and blocked Sasu's path. His body was enveloped in a white light, and the great sword in his hand was dazzling. Morrison's was very tall, which could easily give people the illusion that he was a warrior who relied on brute force. In fact, his speed was very fast. With his height and long arms and a rare great sword, he set up an insurmountable sword array in front of Sasu. Every crow that crashed into it was instantly crushed by the sword array, leaving behind only black feathers that fluttered like snowflakes. Hanjin's expression was serious. He heard from Morrison's that there was a huge difference in strength between a swordsman and a fighter. Only by mastering a fighting technique could one become a fighter, and fighting techniques could maximize the power of one's combat power. If Morrison's was not being modest, and there were warriors like him everywhere, then it would be too chilling. The power of a fighter was beyond Han Jin's reach. He did not even dare to think about becoming a swordsman or a sacred swordsman. This world was a different kind of cultivation world. The super strong men mentioned by Moxink were not inferior to the immortals in the world of cultivation. Sasu began to chant again. Han Jin could feel the air, or something in the air, trembling violently. Then a 10-meter wide fireball appeared on the mountain of crows and swallowed all the crows in the fire. The remaining hundreds of crows lost their courage to continue fighting. They screeched and flew into the sky, but Sasu and Morrison's did not let down their guard. They scanned the forest. The figure jumped down from the tree and said in a clear voice, "Thank you." "You're welcome." Sasu smiled. "Are you alone?" "Yes." The figure walked closer and finally stopped 3 meters away from Morrison's. "My name is Sunir. I'm a treasure hunter. I'm Morrison's. I'm a high-grade swordsman." "He's Sasu. He's a warlock." Morrison's replied. He did not hastily extend his hand to show his friendliness. Everyone could tell that the figure was a woman. Sunir's gaze fell on Han Jin. Han Jin's temperament was the most outstanding. In terms of appearance, Han Jin was also the most handsome among them. Naturally, he would attract the attention of others. Morrison's rolled his eyes and quickly introduced, "This is Raphael, a prophet and a hereditary baron." "What?" Sunir exclaimed. Even Cessation turned around abruptly and looked at Han Jin with a surprised and doubtful look. "Nice to meet you." Han Jin smiled and nodded. Han Jin knew that Morrison's was a scheming person. He must have his reasons for introducing himself, so Han Jin did not refute. "It's an honor to meet you." Sunir bowed. Han Jin was a little surprised. Sunir was able to maintain her composure in front of Morrison's and Sisu, who had saved her life. However, she had to bow in front of him. Obviously, the prophet's status was very high. However, he did not know how to respond. He could not just say, "Rise." In the end, he could only maintain his warm smile and nod. "The Terasham Mountains are just ahead of us. How dare you come here alone? You're quite brave." Sasu smiled. "I didn't expect to meet those annoying black crows." Sunir paused. "Where are you going?" "We're going to the Bite Man," Sasu replied. "That's great. Can you let me go with you?" Sasu was about to say something, but he closed his mouth and turned to look at Han Jin. Sunir was also looking at Han Jin when she asked. Her identity as a prophet had caused some subtle changes. "No problem," Han Jin answered without hesitation. "Thank you so much." Sunir smiled. Her voice was very pleasant to the ears. What a pity. The same thought flashed through the minds of Han Jin and the others at the same time. Sunir was wearing a tight, soft armor. Her body curves were extremely attractive, especially her legs, which were straight and slender. Although the texture and color of her skin couldn't be seen, the beauty of the streamlined shape was enough to make people gasp in admiration. Sunir also had a head of smooth golden hair, which fluttered in the wind like silk. She was very beautiful. However, her face was covered with layers of scale-like things. There were even bumps on them. She didn't even look like a human being. If Sunir was graded from the back, she would at least score 99. However, when one looked at her from the front, she gave off a horrible feeling. "We should leave immediately. If there are soldiers from Black Raven City, we'll be in trouble," Sasu said softly. "Yes." Han Jin nodded. Suddenly, he felt a very weak energy fluctuation. He turned around and saw something under the tree that was emitting a faint light. Han Jin hurried over. The glowing things were some fingernail-sized stones. He picked one up from the ground and observed it carefully. "Those are magic crystals of the Black Crows." "They're useless," Morrison said. Han Jin almost cursed. "Useless?" Each magic crystal contained at least $100 worth of energy. How could they be useless? If he and Steelberg were alone at this moment, he would definitely shout wildly to vent the excitement in his heart. Han Jin barely controlled his emotions and said in a low voice, "Steelberg, pick up these magic crystals and put them away." "Yes, young master." Steelberg didn't care whether they were useful or not. As long as it was the young master's order, he would do it. Morrison's and the others looked at each other. However, Since Han Jin had already made up his mind, they couldn't say anything. Anyway, it wouldn't take too long. Morrison's, where can I buy these magic crystals? Han Jin asked slowly. Since they were useless, it meant that these magic crystals were very cheap. This was the fastest way for him to reach the top. You can't buy them anywhere. No one will collect this kind of garbage. Morrison's shook his head. Garbage? Han Jin took a deep breath. He didn't want to explain. He had heard from Morrison's that there were magic crystals in the bodies of low-level holy animals. However, Sasu had burned nearly 1,000 black crows to death. There were at least 200 or 300 magic crystals on the ground, which added up to nearly $30,000 worth of energy. It was enough for him to complete the foundation establishment. How could he not be overjoyed? Thousands of words turned into a sigh in Han Jin's mouth. I like this forest. If you have recommendations, please give me a few tickets. I can't catch up with him no matter how hard I try. I'm so depressed. Chapter 13. Walking in the forest at night was a very difficult task. There were holy animals everywhere, pits formed by decayed leaves, poisonous mosquitoes, thorns, and so on. It was a headache for Han Jin, especially for Steelberg. He was so tired that he didn't even have the strength to straighten his back. But surprisingly, he didn't complain about the hardship or tiredness. He just gritted his teeth and followed Han Jin. His perseverance was really impressive. The rest of the people, whether strong or weak, were all professionals. Although the path they took was the same, the effort they put in was completely different. Fortunately, they had Sunir as their new companion. She had excellent eyesight at night, so she walked at the front and was responsible for leading the way. Without her, they might have had a harder time. Morrison's carried his greatsword and brought up the rear. Han Jin and Sasu walked in the middle. The group walked for dozens of miles and decided to rest in a tree hole in the early morning. Stillbird did not care about anything else. When he heard that they were going to rest, he was the first to crawl into the tree hole and lay down on the ground. After a while, snoring sounds could be heard from the tree hole. You guys go ahead and rest. I'm not sleepy. Sunir pointed at the tree hole. In fact, she could not sleep at all. It was just a tree hole. Was she going to squeeze in with others? Sasu yawned and crawled into the tree hole. He was also tired. Han Jin quietly nudged Morrison's and walked to the side. Morrison's slowly followed behind Han Jin. After walking for more than 30 meters, Han Jin suddenly remembered that Sunir had excellent hearing. He was worried and walked another 40 meters. He looked back for a moment and asked, Morrison's, why did you lie? When did I lie? Morrison's asked curiously. You told them that I was a prophet. Oh, that. Morrison's laughed. Then what's your class? Sorcerer? You can't even release a small fireball. Warrior? You don't even have a weapon, let alone combat chi. Hunter? Thief? None of them. Only prophet suits you. Han Jin frowned. You can tell them that I'm just an ordinary nobleman. Then who will look up to you? In fact, when I saw you in Miss Chili's place, I already recognized you. That's why I'm interested in you. I'm very curious. What could make you change so much in just a few days? Morrison said softly, Raphael, do you want to be looked down upon by others like in Radon Town? I know that the world is very realistic when I was young. If you have no ability and can do nothing, hee. Han Jin sighed. He knew what Morrison's meant. Just now, when Stillberg couldn't walk, Sasu released magic several times to bless Stillberg. If you are useless in his eyes, do you think he will waste his magic power? I know. Han Jin nodded. A prophet is a wise man who guides people out of trouble, but not all of them. Morrison's laughed strangely. Do you understand? Isn't it a good profession? If what I said is right, it's the embodiment of my wisdom. If what I said is wrong, it's the arrangement of fate. People can't fight against fate. Is that what you mean? Han Jin smiled. Huh, you got it as soon as I said it. It seems that you really have the talent to be a prophet. Your badge can prove your identity. Do I, the prophet, need any proof as well? You don't need anything. Morrison smiled. In the Elven language, a prophet is a wise man who can see the future. Actually, anyone can be a prophet. The key is whether or not there is anyone who believes in them. Don't worry, I will help you. Then I only have one question left. What is it? Why are you helping me? Hanjin asked calmly. This question is too deep. Moxing scratched his head and said, My teacher told me that I'm only a little clever and can achieve great things. But you have a lot of ideas and a lot of ideas. With your brain and my sword, we will become the best partners. So, it's different from what you told me last time. Huh? You told me last time that your teacher said that your brain is not very good and advised you to make friends with smart people so that you can learn something. Hanjin smiled. There's a big difference between being not very good and being smart. No way? How many days ago did you still remember? Nonsense. Hanjin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I trust your brain more and more now. Morrison's patted Hanjin's shoulder and said seriously, I think that we can create a glorious future together. Before we create a future, can you answer my question first? Hee. Then I'll tell you the truth. A meaningful smile appeared on Moxing's face. Your appetite is too big. Humans can't eat so much food. I can guarantee that you are the descendant of a giant dragon and a human. You may be down and out now, but you have the identity of a dragonborn. In the future, you don't believe this? Before Morrison's finished speaking, he had already noticed the strange look on Hanjin's face. I can see that your cleverness is also very limited. Hanjin shook his head helplessly. Miss Chi Li asked me to deal with that dwarf. Will she investigate my past? What about you? Haven't you asked her? I have never been out of Radon Town since I was a child. My parents seldom go out. Isn't it easy to find out? Descendant of a giant dragon and a human. It's not easy to win the trust of a prophet. Morrison smiled bitterly. I know what you want to ask. My purpose, right? But I have no purpose. I just want to make friends with you, pure friends. Why didn't you say so earlier? Why did you make up a story for me? Hanjin's face was full of contempt. And you're so bad at making up stories. I suggest you find some kids to practice with when you go to the Bite Man College. You believe me? Morrison's didn't understand. Why not? Hanjin asked. Although he had to admit that most of the acquaintance, communication, and cooperation between intelligent beings were based on interests, they also desired to have one or several pure friends. Once the former had no common interests, they would part ways immediately or even turn against each other. But the latter didn't care about status or wealth. Moxing's expression was gloomy. He had never expected that Hanjin, who always liked to get to the bottom of things, would believe in such an unreliable reason. What a waste of his time and effort. Let's go back. If we don't go back now, they will be suspicious. I'm going to find something to eat. You go back by yourself. Morrison's said in a muffled voice. Get some more. You ate a whole boar yesterday. Do you still want to eat more? Morrison's was going crazy. Why don't you say that I have been running for the whole night? Hanjin retorted. I admire you. I admire you so much. Morrison's let out a long sigh and walked into the forest without looking back. When Hanjin returned to his original spot, Sunir was sitting on top of a tree, humming an unknown song. Her voice was clear and pleasant, but her singing was very gentle, like a lullaby. Hanjin leaned against the tree trunk and listened for a while. His eyelids gradually became heavy, so he closed his eyes. After some time, Morrison's voice woke Hanjin up. Get up, get up. What? Sasu asked. He sounded a little unhappy, which was normal. No one liked to be disturbed when they were sleeping. Light the fire. I don't have any fire, Morrison said confidently. Cessation sighed helplessly and staggered out of the tree hole. When he saw the prey on the ground, his sleepy eyes suddenly lit up. Back-feathered lizard. Good stuff. How'd you catch it? I snatched it from the mouths of two human-faced eagles. I'm in luck today, Morrison said proudly. You can go to sleep after you light the fire. You dare to provoke two fifth-grade monsters at once. You got guts. Sasu automatically ignored the second half of Morrison's words. He sat down and released a small fireball to light the branches he had prepared. A moment later, Sunir came out of the woods with a bundle of twigs in her arms. Seeing the bonfire was lit and the two cleaned back-feathered lizards were put on the fire, She couldn't help shaking her head. What a pity! The flesh of the back-feathered lizards was extremely tender and was famous for its delicious taste. However, the back-feathered lizards were very weak in combat. They were at the bottom of the food chain and moved slowly. They were now close to extinction. The back-feathered lizards sold in the city were mostly reared by humans. Wild ones were very rare. If they were sold in the city, 2 back-feathered lizards could definitely be exchanged for a small fortune. Hanjin didn't know how precious the back-feathered lizards were. Otherwise, he would have tried to keep them. It was cost-effective. What's a pity? It's good enough that we can eat them. Sasa laughed. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly thought of something. He slowly looked up at Hanjin and sighed. What a pity. Raphael, no, Lord Prophet, please go to sleep, Morrison's begged. I'm not sleepy. Even if I am, I won't be sleepy when I see food. Hanjin said honestly. He now had a double desire for food. One was physical, and the other was psychological. Sunir, why don't you take a walk with our prophet? Morrisons kept winking at Sunir. In fact, they had just formed a team and weren't familiar with each other. His words and expression were a little rude. What? Sunir didn't get angry. She only asked curiously. You'll know in a while. You first. Sunir insisted. You will regret this. Morrisons said in a painful tone. Sunir looked at one person and then another. Her face was full of confusion. Stillberg, come out and eat. If you don't eat, there won't be any left. Morrisons yelled. The snoring in the tree hole suddenly stopped. The next moment, Stillberg rushed out with his eyes half closed. Anyone who had spent some time with Hanjin would learn a painful lesson. No matter how much food there was in front of them, they had to fight for it and eat with all their might. Otherwise, Hanjin would finish everything. If they were late, they would have to starve. Sunir was sitting sideways. She moved her fingers, and a shining plate appeared in her hand out of thin air. Morrisons and Sasu looked at each other quickly. They knew what it meant. A space ring. Knives, forks, and cutlery appeared like magic. In the end, Sunir took out an exquisite knife and wiped it with a white handkerchief. Sunir's movements were indescribable. It was elegant, fresh, and natural. If Sunir wasn't so ugly, it would be an unforgettable scene. Morrisons and Sasu forced themselves to look at the back-feathered lizard. It was impolite to stare at it. It smells so good. Stillberg wrinkled his nose exaggeratedly. Morrisons grabbed his greatsword and poked at the back-feathered lizard with the tip of his sword. The skin was cut open, revealing white and tender flesh. It's almost done. Sunir raised the knife and turned around, but she froze again. She saw 6 hands fighting to grab the back-feathered lizard. In the blink of an eye, one side of the back-feathered lizard was torn into a mess. Sunir was stunned. Perhaps it was because she had never seen such impolite behavior. After a while, she shook her head. She had no choice but to move to Hanjin's side. In comparison, Hanjin was the most gentlemanly. When Sunir came to his side, he even gestured for her to go first. Sunir carefully cut off a palm-sized piece of meat. She then stood up and walked behind a tree. She was not used to eating with a man who was fighting over her. To be honest, she was very lucky to avoid Hanjin at this moment. At least she would not choke. However, when Sunir finished the meat on the plate in small bites and wanted to cut another piece, she was stunned again. There was nothing left except bones. Morrisons and the other 2 were lying on the grass. They touched their stomachs and groaned happily. Hanjin was still looking for something in the skeleton. Sunir bit her lip and put the plate and the tableware on it into her space ring. She then turned around and walked into the forest. Sunir, where are you going? Hanjin asked. I'm going to take a walk. Don't go too far. Morrisons quickly sat up. I know. Morrisons, this back-feathered lizard, is it a monster? Hanjin asked slowly. It's a Class 2 monster. What about a wild boar? It depends on what kind of boar it is. The one you caught yesterday. That's not a monster. Understood. Hanjin nodded. He felt that the back-feathered lizard meat contained more energy than the boar meat. As for how much more energy it contained, he could not calculate it. Unless he accurately cut off half a pound of boar meat and half a pound of back-feathered lizard meat, He could not make a comparison. Sassu, you will scout ahead tomorrow, Morrison said in a low, muffled voice. Okay, we will reach the Beatman's town of Peel after we climb over a few mountains. Don't let anything happen before that. Morrison's looked helpless. We can't bear the responsibility. Are you talking about Sunir? Han Jin smiled. I thought she was an experienced hunter yesterday. I didn't expect. Sassu shook his head. Sassu, are you familiar with the Bite Man? Morrison's asked. Very familiar. Why? Take a guess. Which family is she from? How can I guess? Sassu thought for a moment. I have no impression of a girl who likes to go out and play alone and do boring things. Not only boring, but also stupid. Morrison's puffed out his chest. Luckily, we are all good people. Otherwise, I think she's wearing a mask. Have you ever seen such an ugly woman before? Don't say. I think so too. In the distance, where Han Jin and the others could not see, Sunir was quietly standing behind a tree. She seemed to be listening to something. After a while, she continued to walk deeper into the forest. Author's note: Assassin is the complete book, so I can't send messages in the VIP chapters. Learn from this lesson. Next time, no matter how tired you are, you have to write continuously. There can't be a break between two books. Chapter 14. Walk 100 steps after a meal and live to 99 years old. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong, at least not everyone could do it. For example, Steelberg had gone back to sleep, Cessation was still lying on the grass, and Moxink was walking around. Practicing swordsmanship had given him a good body. Suddenly, Sassu murmured, Morrison's, how did you say you caught the back-feathered lizard? I snatched it from the mouths of the two human-faced eagles. What's wrong? Damn it. Sassu jumped up in horror and yelled, Sunir! Sunir! Before he could finish his words, Sunir had already rushed out of the woods and snapped. Shut up. Don't make a sound. Morrison's and Sassu were a bit surprised. When they were talking about Sunir, they generally thought that Sunir was an inexperienced hunter, or Sassu would not have been the one to lead the way. However, now Sunir was very imposing, and her eyes were shining with cold light. She did not look like a newbie at all. At this moment, a sharp sound came from the sky. Han Jin looked up and saw a dozen black spots hovering in the sky through the leaves. The human-faced eagles are back for revenge, Sunir said in a low voice. Get into the tree hole, quick. The words human-faced eagle made Han Jin's blood boil. He still remembered Cessation's words. Human-faced eagle was a 5th grade holy animal, which meant that it could get better magic crystals and better food. If Sunir hadn't mentioned the second half of her words, Han Jin would have raised his arms and shouted, Brothers, let's kill them. Out of his thirst for energy, Han Jin would have raised his arms and shouted, Come on, brothers. The untimely fantasy ended in an instant. The next moment, Han Jin and the others hid in the tree hole. Though he didn't have a clear idea of the attack power of a 5th grade holy animal, he knew how nervous they were. There would be magic crystals and energy. The most important thing now was to protect himself. This forest was located at the edge of the Terashah Mountains. There were no tall, ancient trees, and the tree hole they chose to hide in was very small. The 5 of them had to squeeze together. Stillberg was the most unlucky one. He was sandwiched between Sassu and Morrison's, and his face was less than 3 inches away from Morrison's butt. What a hot and seductive body. This was Han Jin's feeling. Of course, he did not dare to say it out loud. Sunir was so close to him that they could feel each other's heat. However, Sunir's eyes were very calm, while Han Jin's eyes were a bit erratic. As the saying goes, keep warm and think asterisk asterisk. He had just eaten more than half of the back-feathered lizard, so he was quite full. Squeezing together with a woman in a small tree hole, it was quite hot. It was not in line with the mentality of a normal man to say that he did not have any psychological activity. Although Sunir's appearance was very ugly, her seductive body made up for some of her shortcomings. What's more, Sunir's breath smelled like orchids, and her body exuded a light fragrance, which could add to her charm. Besides, the visual effect was not the most important thing. He could choose not to look, but he could not stop breathing. Did those human-faced eagles find us? Sasu asked in a very low voice. I don't think so. Shania also answered in a very low voice. The human-faced eagle's vision is not that good. Sunir, you also saw those human-faced eagles, right? How many of them are there? About 50 or 60. No way. Sasu was shocked. He just happened to see those human-faced eagles flying over when he was lying on the grass. But the leaves were so dense that he could not see the specific number. That's strange. We are still in the periphery of the magic beast forest. How can there be so many human-faced eagles suddenly? Morrison's frowned. Morrison's, did you do something bad? Hanjin asked in a low voice. Me? No. You just robbed a back-feathered lizard, and they came out in groups to take revenge on you. It can't be that serious, right? Hanjin paused. Let me guess, you even molested her after robbing her. Go away, Morrison's said angrily. The tension in the tree hole was gone. Sasu tried to hold back his laughter. Morrison's, it's not their fault. You went too far. Morrison stared at Sasu and moved his body. Sasu could not help but groan. They were too close. Morrison's deliberately squeezed him, making him feel suffocated. Sunir smiled and then said in a low voice, Don't mess around. The human-faced eagles are still up there. Morrison's became quiet. They waited quietly. After a long time, the screams of the human-faced eagles became fainter and fainter. Sunir quietly got out of the tree hole and observed for a moment. Then she sighed and waved her hand, indicating that they could come out now. Lesson learned. Morrison's, next time you do something bad, you must kill them. Do you understand? Sasu sighed after he regained his freedom. You bastard. I'll kill them right now. Morrison's reached out his hand to grab Sasu's arm. But at this moment, Sunir suddenly raised her finger. Listen. Everyone held their breath and listened carefully, but they could not hear anything. I can't hear anything. Morrison's shook his head. There are fighting sounds on the other side of the mountain. Sunir thought for a moment and smiled bitterly. We can't recognize the appearance of the holy animals, and the holy animals can't recognize us either. Someone must be out of luck for us. Morrison's and Sasu looked at each other. They had to admit that although they had different professions and experiences, they were both young, hot-blooded, conscientious, and righteous. Time had not had the time to leave a cold mark of interest in their hearts. They were the ones who caused this trouble, and now some strangers had to bear the disastrous consequences, which made them somewhat uncomfortable. What should we do? Morrison's looked at Hanjin. The reason he made up was not all fiction. From what he had seen and heard these days, he had a general understanding of Hanjin. So when he encountered a headache, his first reaction was to listen to Hanjin's opinion. How powerful is a 5th-grade holy animal? Hanjin asked. Morrison's pointed at Sasu. What? Hanjin did not understand. I'm a warlock, a 5th-grade professional. Sasu smiled and said, In principle, a human-faced eagle should be as powerful as me. Sasu saw that Hanjin did not know about holy animals, so he patiently explained. Holy animals were generally divided into 10 grades. Above the 10th grade was the top grade holy animals. The most powerful holy animals were beyond the standard of grade evaluation, so they were called super-grade holy animals. The human professions also had a corresponding system. For example, the highest professional title of a magician was Great Magus, and the highest professional title of a swordsman was Sacred Swordsman. Both of them had the power to fight against super-grade holy animals. The scene was a bit strange. In fact, Sasu's ability to express himself was not so bad, but his narration was very long-winded. Sometimes he even had to repeat himself. Hanjin's ability to understand had always been excellent. However, he was now listening to the nonsense with great interest. Even if Sasu repeated a point, he still remained serious and never interrupted Sasu. At the edge of the Terasham Mountains, there were no fools among these people who gathered together due to various coincidences. Morrison sat lazily on the ground, wiping his huge sword. Sunir had sneaked into the canopy and was playing with the green leaves in her hands. They were too lazy to listen to Sasua's nonsense or watch Hanjin's performance. On the surface, no one had made a decision, but in fact, they had reached a consensus. First of all, Hanjin and Sasu did not agree to save the people. At this time, explaining the professional system of the continent was just to delay the time. Morrisons and Sunir did not reiterate whether to save the people or not. Obviously, they had acquiesced to Hanjin and Sasua's choice. Young people were still thin-skinned. At least they did not want to leave a selfish impression on their companions. Seeing that everyone seemed to have forgotten the question, Sasu tactfully stopped talking. Hanjin suddenly thought of something. Morrisons, the human-faced eagles are so powerful. How dare you provoke them? I was just robbing, not fighting with them. Morrison's University said casually. And I was sneak attacking. When I rushed over, one of the human-faced eagles was still in the hole of the back-feathered lizards. Only a small part of it, but was exposed. Hee. I just went up and, before he finished his words, Morrison suddenly closed his mouth. Oh, Hanjin and Sasu said at the same time meaningfully. You two scums. Too dirty. Morrison's was angry and amused at the same time. Yes, you should wipe it clean. Hanjin smiled and sat next to Morrison's. Okay, let's be serious. Morrison's peeked at Sunir, who was hiding in the canopy, and whispered, Who do you think that huntress is? Why are you suddenly interested in her? She took out the dimensional ring in front of us. Hee. At first I thought she didn't know how sinister people can be and was a little fool. But then, Morrison said thoughtfully, Raphael, you're smarter than me. Tell me. It's simple. She doesn't think we're a threat to her. Hanjin smiled. Humph. A treasure hunter. Morrison sneered. Morrison's, to tell you the truth, my real identity is also a swordsman, and I'm a sword sage. Hanjin said seriously. Are you stupid? Are you dreaming in broad daylight? Morrison's threw the great sword in his hand to the ground. Go. If you can run 1,000 meters with my sword, I'll admit that you're a sword sage. Hanjin smiled and picked up Morrison's greatsword. With his current stamina, running 1,000 meters with the sword was no problem. But if he couldn't actually run, wouldn't he be an idiot? Hanjin waved the greatsword in his hand. You don't believe me? Run. As long as you can run 1,000 meters, I'll believe you. Morrison's tempted. You don't believe me, but she said she's a treasure hunter. Why do you believe her? Hanjin smiled. Morrison's was stunned for a moment. Didn't we save her from the black crows yesterday? I don't think so. Hanjin said slowly. I think her class isn't good at dealing with black crows. When we rushed out, the black crows had already started attacking her. But think about it, was she hurt? Her hair wasn't even messed up. Then why is she with us? Don't think too much, Hanjin interrupted Morrison's. As long as she doesn't mean us harm, that's enough. How do you know she doesn't mean us harm? What do we have? Hanjin's face was full of exasperation. Does she want to rob your broken sword or the magic crystals of my black crows? Or does she want to steal a husband because she can't get married? It's possible. It's very possible. Morrison slapped his thigh. Just look at her. She definitely can't get married. So I beg you to shut up, please. Even if she wants to steal a husband, Sasu and I are here. You're safe. Hee. Men like to look at a woman's face, but women don't like men that way, Morrison said in an experienced tone. Hanjin didn't know what to say and kept silent. Morrison's didn't want to let Hanjin go. He clenched his fist. Do you have this? Do you have this? Morrison's made his chest muscles bulge. Do you have this? Morrison's pointed at his thigh. Hanjin looked at the greatsword in his hand. He really wanted to smash Morrison's head with it. This was the second time he wanted to do something to Morrison's. Chapter 15. Sunir jumped down from the tree, looked at the sky, and murmured, No. What's wrong? Sasu asked hurriedly. The human-faced eagles came from that direction. It's been a long time, and they should have come back unless... They looked at each other. There was only one possibility, The 50 or 60 human-faced eagles had all been killed. But then again, who had such powerful strength? Let's go and have a look, Han Jin said softly. He was still thinking about the magic crystals of the human-faced eagles. Let's wait for a while. Sasu hesitated. In fact, some human beings were more terrible than the holy animals these days. Since the enemy had the strength to kill dozens of human-faced eagles, it would be easy for him to kill them. The battle over there has been over for a long time, Sunir said slowly. Are you sure? Sasu asked. My hearing has always been very good, Sunir said confidently. Then let's go and have a look, Morrison said. Han Jin woke up Stillberg, and they climbed to the top of the mountain one by one. It was noon, and the sun was pouring down from above, sweeping away the haze in the dense forest. Therefore, they moved much faster than last night. After about half an hour, they had climbed to the top of the mountain. Looking down, they could clearly see that there were some abnormalities on the mountainside. There were a few empty spaces in the lush forest, which would only appear when the trees were cut down in large swathes. Although they were mentally prepared, Han Jin and the others were still shocked by the messy battlefield. There was blood everywhere. There were bodies of human-faced eagles and human beings, and most of the bodies were incomplete. The broken limbs, minced meat, and even internal organs of human beings and eagles were scattered all over the ground like sand and stones, which gave them a strong visual impact. Han Jin and Sunir were the calmest. Sasu felt sorry for them. Morrison's clenched the hilt of his sword and looked a little nervous. Stillberg was shivering, and even his lips were trembling. He had never seen such a bloody scene, and it was lucky that he didn't pass out. Sunir, who was walking in the front, suddenly stopped and carefully observed a crack on the ground that was about a foot deep and 10 feet long, with very smooth edges. She lowered her voice and said, "There is at least one high-grade fighter among them." Morrison's moved closer, and when he saw the crack clearly, he nodded slowly. The difference between swordsmen and fighters was that the latter had mastered fighting skills, and the power of fighting skills could only be exerted by the materialization of the fighting skills. For example, the light of the sword and the power of the protective fighting skills could provide a strong defense, which was a symbol of the materialization of the fighting. If he wanted to leave such a crack on the ground, he could only release sword light. At least, he couldn't do that. This way, Sasu waved his hand. He found a bloody road, and it seemed that those people were fighting and retreating in this direction. They searched along the bloody road. Sunir's eyes were a little blank, and her 2 sideburns were bulging, as if something was hiding under the cover of her golden hair. Unfortunately, no one paid attention to her at this time. In front of them were piles of corpses of human-faced eagles, and there were hardly any human beings. Obviously, the weak human beings had all been killed in the initial fight, and the rest were the strong ones. Turning right, they came to the end of the bloody road. A huge rock as high as 2 people blocked their way. In this small square, which was only dozens of square meters, there were more than 10 corpses of human-faced eagles and several human beings lying in a pool of blood. 2 of them were human corpses that had been shattered beyond recognition. Below the boulder, there was a tall figure leaning against it. His soft armor was still intact, and a frightening giant axe was leaning weakly on the ground. However, the upper half of his head had disappeared. Messy pieces of flesh, broken bones, and blood were smeared all over the boulder, forming an unbearable picture. There was another person lying 15 or 16 meters away from the huge rock, and his body was covered with wounds. The most shocking thing was that a huge, human-faced eagle was creeping in front of him, and the sharp beak of the human-faced eagle was deeply pierced into his chest. His left hand grasped the neck of the human-faced eagle, and the sword in his right hand was left in the body of the human-faced eagle. It seemed that he had died together with the human-faced eagle. "He's not dead yet," Sunir exclaimed in a low voice and strode forward. Perhaps hearing the voice, the soldier who died together with the human-faced eagle struggled to open his eyes. Seeing the figure in front of him, he suddenly became excited. Morrison's hurriedly pressed his shoulder and said, "Don't move. You are badly injured." In fact, it was not a matter of whether the soldier was seriously injured or not. The soldier's chest was almost pierced through, and they could even see his weak heart. Even if the Pope was here, he could not save him. The soldier opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he was choked by the blood he spat out. At last, he raised his left hand and pointed to the satchel around his waist. Morrison's understood what he meant. He put his hand into the soldier's satchel and took out the things inside. In addition to several magic crystals of fire and earth attributes, there was a very old sheepskin book. Morrison's pupils suddenly shrank. He saw 2 words written on the left side of the sheepskin book, fighting technique, and 2 words on the right side, galaxy. The soldier moved his left hand with difficulty and pointed to the huge rock. Then he grabbed Morrison's collar and stared at Morrison's. His eyes were full of begging. His unwillingness and reluctance were as deep as the sea, which made Han Jin and other strangers feel heavy in their hearts. Ah! The soldier finally spat out a meaningless word, which became his last words. An arrow of blood spurted out from his mouth and shot on Morrison's face. Then his eyes gradually dimmed, but his hand was still holding Morrison's collar. Fighting technique, galaxy, Morrison's. It seems that you are very lucky, Sunir said calmly. Morrison suddenly raised his head and glared at Sunir. He was in a very bad mood. All the tragedies were caused by him. If he did not attack the 2 human-faced eagles, nothing would have happened. Although those people did not know the cause and effect, he knew that it was enough. People could not lie to themselves. He was full of guilt. What was supposed to be a normal conversation now hurt him like a needle. There is someone behind the huge rock, Han Jin said softly. His eyes glanced at the headless body and suddenly brightened, then returned to normal. Morrison's was stunned. He quickly stood up and strode to the huge rock. Looking through the gap between the huge rock and the mountain wall, it was dark behind. There must be a cave. Morrison's first dragged the headless body to one side and then turned to the side of the huge rock. He placed his hands on the huge rock, and his body emitted the light of combat power. Open! With Moxink's roar, the boulder began to shake more and more violently. Finally, with a loud bang, it rolled and broke an oak tree as thick as the rim of a bowl, leaving a 1-meter-high hole in the mountain wall. Morrison's bent over and crawled into the cave. After a while, he anxiously shouted, "Raphael, quick, come in." Han Jin immediately rushed in. With the help of the sunlight, he could faintly see a woman lying quietly on the ground. He immediately understood why Morrison's called him in. He knew this woman. She was Miss Chi Li, the woman who had been talking to Morrison's for the past few days. Han Jin could not help but smile bitterly. He and Morrison's looked at each other. He had helped Miss Chi Li once and caused her to lose a servant. Morrison's had only stolen a back-feathered lizard today, and now this happened. Was Miss Chi Li's bad luck this year? Or was it that he and Morrison's were destined to be Miss Chi Li's nemesis? Sunir also came in from outside. What happened? We know her. Han Jin stuttered. Sunir bent over and touched Chi Li's neck. Then she opened Chi Li's eyelids. She was knocked out. Carry her out first. We'll talk later, Han Jin said. You want to ask someone else to do such a good thing? Sunir smiled. I'm not in the mood to joke. Han Jin's face turned cold. He was mentally mature and could withstand a lot of negative emotions, but Morrison's could not. He had enough reason to worry. If Sunir continued to tease him, Morrison's might get angry and start a fight with Sunir. Sunir was silent for a moment. Then, she bent down and picked up Chi Li. I'm sorry, but it has already happened. We should think about how to deal with the aftermath. With that, Sunir bent over and walked out of the cave. When they returned to the sunlight, Han Jin suddenly felt that the sunlight was too bright. Let's go somewhere else. I'm afraid that when she wakes up, she won't be able to take it. You're very thoughtful. Sunir nodded. What happened? Sasu asked. He noticed that Han Jin's mood was a little strange, and Morrison's face had turned green. Isn't this Miss Chi Li? Stillbird exclaimed. Sasu paused for a moment. He was not stupid. He immediately realized that the woman who survived was the Chi Li that Han Jin had mentioned before. Moreover, She was most likely a friend of Han Jean and Morrison's. His face darkened. Not long ago, he and Han Jean had objected to coming over to help. If they had arrived in time, things might not have turned out this bad. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.